This is our block my wife and I bought this year. My parents have, I've got 7,000 acres near Guyra, and my wife's family just actually at the other side of this mountain range have got a property there that they took up. I think the third generation there took it up as a selection. It's only 165 acres, 65 hectares here, which this was when in April we just weaned our lambs and headed across there. That was about a month ago. We'd got a little bit of rain, and that was last week. Our property goes to sort of here, and that's our neighbour's soil blowing away across. So we've had, as you can see, we don't have a lot of trees in our place at the moment. We're working on that. These are some oaks we've just planted in the front here. But winds this year have been a big dry out. We'll get that 30 mils of rain. That'll be a good start to getting some stuff growing, and then within 2 weeks it'd blown away. So we actually destocked our cattle in February, and we weaned the lambs there, and then they went in June. So we haven't had any stock on since then, and tried to maintain. I think we're probably at about some paddocks are 100% ground cover, but there are some that are probably about 80% ground cover. But our neighbours are still rotating and grazing around us. And you actually see on that particular photo, probably doesn't come up quite well, I can show you on here. This is a west-facing hill they pulled up, which is red basalt country, and that's just bare. The winds and grazing taking off, and then the winds taking what's left has gone up our way. So yeah, we're sitting at a rolling 12 months, we're about half our unicorn annual rainfall. For this year, our calendar, we should be sitting at around 500 mils, and we're sitting about 220. So we've destocked, and we're now looking, we're waiting for the opportunity, we're doing stuff to prepare ourselves. So today, just a little, we'll go through some of the background and principles of what we're trying to achieve with our grazing, and then we'll have a look at how we can do some planning with our growing and non-growing season, and then this afternoon we'll look at actually what the process is to fill out a chart. Don't be daunted by it. It's a process that the planning process is something we do a couple of times a year, and we'll talk about that. So we're not doing this every day. So, but we'll go out in the paddock and we'll do some feed budgeting, and especially now we're going to particularly look at a non-growing season, given where you guys are, so that we can look at how we manage from this point and this planning point forward, and then we'll talk about what would change in a growing season. I suppose, and it's going to vary quite a lot here, but I was on a place yesterday, and it seems to be with your climate here, you've got your non-growing season, you're starting now, you'll have you've got a growing season section when you'll have rain and that spring through, and then you'll have a slow growth through your winter when you're getting your rain, but you don't have the temperature to get stuff growing. So you've sort of got three. Would that be about right? Yeah. So we can look at, we'll talk about and talk about the strategies that we do with that, so that we can manage around those. As Brendan sort of alluded to, we're changing, but it's managing what we've got. Brian Wahlberg talks about a friend of his in Africa who has 23 mils of rain a year that falls in a 2-week period. That's it. And he manages it. Now, I think last year they got 10 or 14 of those mils, and that was it. So he has to work with that and what he's got in the grasses and the pastures and shrubs and the things that he works with there on that. So we're all different, and we just have to look at managing what we've got. Just a little bit, Southern Blue Regenerative. We've been operating as Southern Blue Regenerative for a couple of years now. I'd previously done small business consulting. As I said, I worked for RCS for a number of years. I did 10 years benchmarking and running the Profit Pro benchmarking program for RCS, as well as facilitating. But I've run IT businesses and tourism businesses and various things. And for me, it gives me a really good diversity to sort of bring a whole range of stuff. I've even worked for the banks and worked for Elders Finance for a number of years as well. So, but one of the things that I do and what I have been doing for the last couple of days, been down here running a regenerative farming tour, taking people around to really look at what's possible, and we showcase places. And we were at John O and Nat's the other day, just to bring people to say, well, trying to open up some eyes and change some paradigms around, what you could do. And we go from 2 hectare places up to 2,000 hectares. So we don't pick particular places, and we try and do diversity. And this particular one here is from 2012. That's Joel Salatin. And on Polyface, I took a group to the US, and we did 20 days around the US, which we're looking at doing that program again soon. And the diversity of those properties. So I love doing those. They're really a teaching process and learning from all of the people that we go and their expertise. And I've been working with Brian Welberg for the last couple of years in mentoring with Brian as a really quality and experienced educator to hone my holistic management a little bit further than my experience. So who's had a look at the holistic management and the framework before? So Helen has. So holistic management, Alan Savory put together a framework rather than a system or a process to allow us to be able to manage complexity is really what it comes down to. The key of it comes around our context and our statement of purpose and our vision for what we want to do for ourselves. That's the thing that guides our decisions, and we'll look at those decisions, even right down to our grazing charts and making sure that we're balancing out our people, environment and our economics. If we're not economically viable, we can't look after the environment and we can't look after the people. The people aren't happy and enjoying themselves and healthy, then all the stuff. So there's sort of, some guys use 3 legs of the pot. If one of them's weak, the pot's going to fall over and we lost it. So it's balancing those decisions around that. But we've got to, you've got to start with your vision, your statement of purpose, your context to say, what is it that makes me happy to get up in the morning, and what's going to make our family happy and our community that we're doing that in. And those decisions we're making, especially on grazing, are coming to develop what's our future resource base look like. What do we want this place or your place or our communities to look like now, and into the future. So we actually are making decisions when we decide, whether it's to put super on or not. We're not saying do or don't do anything. That comes to you to make decisions and say, okay, well, if I make this decision, is this moving me in the right direction? Is it achieving the things I want? Are the people happy? Is it benefiting the environment? So what we're trying to, or what we are managing, is the 4 ecosystem processes. So these are the things that sustain all life. Our water cycle and mineral cycle are probably the ones that everybody focuses on. We're talking about our fertility of our soils and the water in our creeks and things. But effectively, all these 4 are like windows looking into our environment. And if any one of them is broken, then the others will probably be affected as well, or will be affected as well. So we sort of look at them in balance. And in fact, once what we do is actually, if we improve one of them, we start to improve the others as well. So we'll go through each of these. And so we're looking at mineral cycle. It's the foundation of getting cycling minerals from our soils to our plants and getting that cycle go. When we're Alan Savory talks about brittle and non-brittle environments. So a brittle environment is one where we have seasonal moisture in our environment. So we're in a non-brittle one here. Then there's a scale from one side to the other. It's not black or white. And a non-brittle environment, so a brittle environment, a non-brittle environment is a rainforest or something like the redwood forest in California, where humidity is there all the time. And the difference between the two with cycling minerals is that in a non-brittle environment, because of the moisture within the air, a lot of biological activity happens above the ground. So trees will rot, there'll be stuff happening up in the trees or in the plants and things. If you left something out, and I was over at just south of Dalesford yesterday on a property visit, and if you leave things out, they'll get moulds and mildews, and within a couple of years, it'd start to grow things. The analogy, if you left a Kubra hat out in a paddock at Dalesford, what would happen after 12 months? It'd look pretty grey and mouldy and everything else. If you put a Kubra hat out at Alice Springs for 12 months, after 12 months, what would it look like? Bleached and, yeah. So that gives you... So the difference in the brittle environments is because that moisture is not in the air, most of the biological activity happens under the ground or in the stomachs of ruminants. And the problem is with plants is that they'll sit there, and unless we actually get an animal to put that onto the ground to break that cycle, to get that cycle going, for our microbes and our soil food web and everything to get access to that meal, it stops, it stalls. So that's when we start talking, you can drive along roadsides is a great thing. You'll see oxidising and grey plants sitting there, and until we actually cut them or get an animal on it and drop it down, then it'll just sit there. And you can usually tell an area quite well. You'll look out, and if it looks grey, you'll see grey trees or grey bushes that are dying. Well, that's oxidising, and that's volatile oxidisation. So we're losing minerals and elements, and we're losing them up to the atmosphere. So what we're trying to do is actually get a biological process going to get that minerals going around. The other way we can lose them chemically is through leaching or erosion. So we're trying to address those and stop those happening so we can keep those things in. And the more we keep that in, the faster we get that system going, the more we have available to sustain ourselves and our families and live our lives. So by increasing that soil carbon, which is the main part of that cycle we're looking at, you're able to provide a lot of benefits with your soil. You're increasing infiltration. Putting that litter on the surface then starts to improve your water cycle. So you're sort of benefiting two things. You're improving your mineral cycle. You start to improve your water cycle at the same time. And I've got some figures here on what does 1% extra carbon mean from a water cycle point of view. Community dynamics is quite, we're talking about diversity of pasture, diversity of plants, diversity of animals. It's that whole age structures of things. So when you're looking at trees in your paddock, you've got young trees right through to older trees. You have that dynamics there. And what happens with the community dynamics is as we get more species and more into our environment, the more stable it becomes. So when you've got and we do a thing in the course, and Helen will have done it. If you've got a cow and a paspalum plant, and that's all you've got, and the paspalum gets hit by grasshoppers, cow's got nothing else to eat. It's gone. But as we add more and more into that environment, and we add some clover, and we add some insects and some butterflies and some quail thrush and all these things that we have this little exercise, you start to get stability so that if one thing happens, it doesn't break the whole system. And that's what we find. If we go through that scale, the more of that diversity, then we have lower incidence of flood, lower incidence of drought, lower incidence of devastation from insect or disease attack and all those sorts of things. And it's quite an issue within our agricultural productions these days because of the genetic changes we've had in crops and animals and things due to what we've been doing over time. So now we've got, and this John Reed at Redbeard Bakery this week talking about grain varieties and what we've done with and breeding grain varieties to a point where they're all affected by the similar sorts of things. Where in the past, I think Gabe Brown talks about the number of grain species that used to be available in the US from a cropping point of view, and we're down to like 10 or 15% of those varieties, which means if one or two things comes along, it really hits us hard. I look at it from the cattle industry. If at the moment, if you're not producing black cattle, then you're looked as a pariah. But yet most of them, and I worked on a Devon stud when I was at university, and they had a Devon Highland Cross steer that went into the hoof and hook competition at Sydney show. Didn't win on the hoof, because no one liked this rainy, shaggy looking thing. When they hung it up, it won the hook. It had a really high marbling, it was beautiful meat. And once it's there, you don't know whether it was black, red or brindle. There's been some things that have happened because of we've been pushed in direction by our food system and by our corporates and all those sorts of things that mean that we've got a lot less diversity. So it's something we need to consider. And John and Nats have got their British white cattle. We're looking at some different breeds on our place to sort of say, well, how can we add diversity? You've got the polyface type concept where you stack, diversity of animals within a thing. But it doesn't mean we all have to do that. But it's just something to consider within your environment to say, well, how many grasses, herbs, forbs, legumes do I have in my pastures? What's out there? How many trees do I have, availability for birds and insects and those sorts of things? Because all of those things add stability to the system. We were camping on our place. We don't live on our property. We live in town, and there's no house there. So we're out with our camper trailer a few weeks ago, and walking around at night, seeing all the spiders' eyes. And in the morning, woke up. And in the sun, you've got the spider webs in the collecting dew, so collecting that local water cycle again, and we'll have a look at that. But the spiders are one of those peak indicator species because they can't survive unless they've got food for themselves. So for us, that's great. Like, we're looking at that going, well, that's part of our biodiversity that we want to make sure what decisions we make with our grazing and our management are balancing that as well, because it's helping keep stability in our system. So when we make changes within it, and this is a bit of an example to give you an idea. So this is some data from some research looking at introducing planned grazing and high stock density. These are control paddock and the planned grazing, and the paddocks were subdivided in 2001, and this is the water infiltration change within 2 years. Within 5 years of actually that doing. So it just shows that once we actually start to make some of these changes, we can get responses pretty quickly. This one was planned grazing with high stock density, and we'll talk about how we use animal impact as one of our tools in our grazing management. And in some cases, you'll see a lot of people talking about the techno-grazing, the really high density stuff, and there's a whole range around the world. I think it's part of what we do, but if we continue to do it, we actually are starting to get into same again. So Ross, you got a question?
It's a little bit hard to read that in the back here.
Oh, is it?
Is it possible to make it bigger?
That better?
Thank you.
Just Glen, on that infiltration rate, do you know how they measure that?
Offhand, I don't know. What we do is, and I think it's pretty standard, PVC pipe. You can do it yourself, just a short piece of PVC pipe, and you can measure it. If you're getting, I'm trying to think of the rate, 25 millimetres in 4 minutes, I think. Yeah, sort of standard. Yeah. I think Gabe Brown talks about his going from virtually nothing to he can take 25 mils in about 30 seconds, and takes inches an hour. Charles Massey's got a picture in his presentation of the Liverpool Plains, deep black soils up there that should be able to take water like nothing else, and he drove past a paddock that had had 12 mils of rain 24 hours previously, and the water's just sitting on the surface, and that's loss of carbon, loss of surface cover is just sitting there. And those, especially the Liverpool Plains soils, they would have had carbon levels between 10 and 20% from the work that, the soil samples that Strzelecki had. So.
We have to make up some of those moisture PVC things, and we'll standardise them across our group so that we all have the same thing, calibrated and so forth, and we'll distribute those across our group so that everyone can do their own.
Yeah, and monitoring we'll talk about is a key to this so that we know when we're making these decisions what effect we're having. It's a little bit blurry there, but this is a picture of Colin Seises. So this side here is, these two samples were two sides of a fence. One's his and one's his brother's. And this is Colin's side here, obviously, after doing his pasture cropping for, I think, about 15 to 20 years. And he's, on this one you've got, dark soil up here, a bit of carbon and things cycling in this top sort of 4 to 6 inches, but then down here, you've got rock and shale and all other stuff. This, from a mineral cycle point of view, you're really only accessing what's up here. Now, sorry?
It's a root structure down below.
Yeah, so you've got roots coming out the bottom here. You've got, that's 500 millimetres deep. You've darkened the soil, so there's soil carbon and stuff happening down there, and you've got access to a mineral profile that's significantly deeper. So if we can increase our soil carbon levels by 1% in that top 30 centimetres of soil, we can store extra 144,000 litres of water per hectare. So that's 14 millimetres of rainfall from 1%. So if we can get 2%, inch of rain stored in the soil, ready, available, and as P.A. Yeomans used to say, the cheapest place to store your water, in your soil. And there's discussion around natural sequence farming and that, and I think they're part of the toolbox. And when I look at it, I'm going, well, if we're dealing with water that's in creeks and gullies, we've missed this point. If we can store it here, we don't have to do anything to move it and make it available and usable for plants. It's there and available. So, and we can get some quite significant results. So the Strzelecki soil samples, he took 40 to 50 soil samples when he did his explorations, and they've tested those, and they range from 13 to I think 40% carbon. They averaged about 22% carbon. And most of our country now, did your test have carbon?
4.8.
4.8, so that's actually on the high side. I think a lot of our area will be sitting about 1 or 2%. But we can once we start making some changes, we can get that going. So energy capture, and this is where Brendan was talking about, and you guys, I'm driving around and seeing a lot of annual grasses. And we're in because of the cycle we're in and the management run, we're into annual grasses. So when we're talking about energy capture, we've got 3 things that we're looking at with energy capture, and it's a tetrahedron, and I'm going to swap sides so that I can muck up his thing. So we have leaf area. So the bigger the leaf area we can get, the more sunlight. So the bigger the solar panel is up there, the more sunlight we can capture and convert and turn into sugars and into carbon and be able to feed the biology and feed the plant and the animals on it. So the second side of that is time. And this is when we're saying going from annuals to perennials. So the longer we can keep that solar panel or a solar panel in the air capturing energy, then the more minerals and the more energy that we can cycle in that system. And then the final side is density, is plant density. So we can have lucerne. You mentioned lucerne. I don't like lucerne very much because we've genetically changed it to be a plant that's really probably not suitable to grazing. But if you have a lucerne stand, you'll have this beautiful, you look across it and it looks like you got all these great big lucerne leaves and all healthy and stuff. But when you look into the lucerne crop, you'll be a foot apart between plants. So you're losing you've got space there that could actually have plants in it. So what we're doing is having a look and saying, well, what if we look underground, we want to have density across that whole area. We've got some pictures here that Brian has from up in Queensland where you've got buffel grass. You know, you look at these great big buffel grass plants and everything else, and once they get eaten down, you plant here and plant there and plant there. So if we can improve that density and that plant spacing and reduce that down, while also making sure we've got big leafy plants and they're there all the time, we're actually able to capture and utilise more energy. So when we capture energy within, and I can do it on this one, the energy pyramid starts with plants capturing it. Once animals eat it, about 70 to 90% gets lost in that conversion process. So we want to capture as much in here as we can. So if we're actually reducing this down, then we've got much less to deal with. So this is the energy pyramid that when it's usually drawn, it's sort of drawn like a nice pyramid. In actual fact, it's very, very narrow, very shallow because of that loss each time it goes through. So when the herbivores eat it, and then when we eat protein, and then carnivores, and each time it's losing energy down. And the same on the bottom side. When we're looking at the energy pyramid, it goes the same going into our undersoil, our in-soil side of that as well. So we want to make sure that we're capturing as much as that as possible. So in environments like this is the challenge from our management practice we've had. We've got into this very dry, wet periods and where we've got a lot of annual grasses coming and going, and so it's looking at what's the perenniality that we can add back into that system, and even for ours we're looking at shrubs and trees and things as far as that perenniality as well. So what are some of the things that we can use for cut and drop and all that sort of thing. So there's a whole range of different things you can do with regards to that. So as I said, having those green plants there all the time, having warm and cool season perennials, so looking at perennials that are there both of the times of the year. The New England, we're a bit like you guys, but we don't have wet winters, but there's a paradigm within our area that winter has no growth. It's a no growth area. With the grazing management we've been doing on my father's place for the last sort of 20 years, by managing our grasses better and keeping a bulk, we're actually able to reduce the severity of our frosts by having a ground cover that keeps a warmer layer at the soil level, which means that some of our cool season perennials, which were used to be open forest type perennials like Microlinas and Danthonia and those sort of things, are actually able to survive, and we get more growth during winter when traditionally it says, oh, frosts, you can't do anything. So there are ways to think about it, and we've got to sort of ask ourselves the question. Yeah, sorry.
Do you find the tree cover to have a significant impact on the severity of frosts?
Yes. Yeah, it's increasing, and our grazing management is allowing a lot of those trees to come back, and we're now looking at thinning those to go back to an open woodland. So the New England area was traditionally sort of an open woodland, and a lot of Australia country was. I was listening to Dark Emu in the car while I'm driving around, and they're talking about what those early explorers explained parkland type savannas, open parkland areas. So there was grasslands within that, and our particular property, the valley that we most of our grazing in, I think, was open. We have shepherds. We had 6 shepherds huts on our 7,000 acres that were there from 2 stations about 20, 30 kilometres away that were sending shepherds over before they were fencing it off. But I think there's a lot of country that's now thick timber that used to be a lot more open, and a lot of open stuff that had stuff in it. But we found as we've improved our grazing, the Microlina specifically has started coming back underneath the box trees, and we saw in a couple of seasons with rain at the right time, we had these green rings coming under these trees, and then they were extending out until the point that they were connecting up, and then in one paddock where there'd been some pasture improvement over many years, and there was a seed bank, the phalaris came in behind that. So microlina's moving out, and now the soil and mineral cycle's improving, and cattle and sheep aren't sitting there eating that stuff first all the time, and it's starting, so we're actually getting a succession of those plants back through. Yeah. So density, as we said, more plants across the area, leaf area, better quality plants with bigger leaves. A bit of a revelation for me in the last couple of years, you know, we've been pushed to clover as a key, and those legumes within our pastures are a key thing. I have to have them to get protein and things in there. And actually in looking at learning more myself about where these plants sit in their environments they want, and clover is actually a lower succession plant to a lot of grasses. So it actually likes bare ground and things like that to establish. Once you get your soil biology going, you can actually get mineral cycling and higher proteins within your grasses. So I went to university, I did agronomy, I did agricultural economics, wanted to be a consultant from when I was at uni. So I did a diversity, did about animal science and agronomy. The only microbe I was taught about was rhizobial bacteria within a legume. That was it. So now I go, there's free living nitrifying bacteria that you can have in your soil that'll take nitrogen straight out of the atmosphere, give it to a fungi, feed it to a plant. And I go, wow, well, I didn't know. So when I look at that, you're going, okay, legumes have a purpose and a position in our system, but there's other ways we can do it. So water cycle, the final part of that is looking at that hydration across the land. And here Brendan's talking about his creek here. You know, it'd be interesting to trace that creek back up into the catchment and have a look at what's changed over those years and what's happening. From the data that we present in the longer course, we look at the fact that because we're not keeping ground cover, we're losing water off the land quicker. We're getting higher peak flows in streams, but that's not staying there long enough, it just disappears. So we're getting more severe floods. You know, we're at rain events. We had 22 mils in 15 minutes at our place in February, and I probably got 4 times that because it ran off my neighbour's place straight down the hill onto my place, because he had sheep and cattle through there, and there was no ground cover at all. So that rain's fallen, nothing's capturing it. There's no, you know, he's had very low infiltration. We got the same soils, it's like either side of the fence. And what I found when I went and really looked at it, because we've only just bought this place last year, the fence line, the bottom of the fence is about that high. The soil goes up like this. All the litter from his hill has been flowing into that netting fence for years and years and years. And so I was going along with a shovel, digging holes in the dam to let the water through. And on our side, when it went in, we had the ground cover at the time. It was about 2 months that pictures saw the lambs in the paddock there. It was actually in that paddock. And we had that ground cover. We had grass and stuff there, and it was going, because of the volume of water, it was going about 10 or 15 metres in, and by that stage it had spread out and we were soaking in. So.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic to increase carbon to hold more moisture in the soil, which is a wonderful principle. How do we balance that with runoff and capture of water to water our livestock?
So once we start to improve that hydrological cycle, you actually find that instead of dams filling from across ground, they actually fill from underground. You get a lot more, the whole system, and the water pressure and the gravity will actually still, once that soil's full, it'll still flow in, you know, underground though, into those areas.
Particularly in duplex soils where that would happen. What about the free draining soils?
We would still have it on our sandy soils in our area, yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of things in that water cycle we're still really learning about too. And we've now really, because we've hit crisis point, we're now saying, oh, okay, hang on, what are we doing, and what are the effects we're doing on these things? Like, we're in water restrictions in Armidale at the moment. Their solution is to stick down a bore, but the bore is actually in the same catchment as the dam, which is Malpas Dam, which relies on 4 spring-fed creeks coming into it. So that's sort of, there's a bit of cross logic there, but I think from what I've researched and what I've been told by people is that will happen. I think we're still really learning it, and you need to look at your own country and sort of go, well, be observant of it. One of the things we're finding, especially with our grazing management, to allow us with easy grazing management, we're relying on troughed water more than dam water. So changing that, which gives us some benefits from productivity and things as well. So yeah, but it is a question that comes up, and yeah, I think Peter Andrews' work is showing that once you start to slow that water down within the whole of the landscape, it's able to infiltrate in. And I saw this, and if you go through your towns, you can probably see this too. I saw it in Armidale this year. We had playing fields on the edge of a creek that didn't have a lot of water in it, had a bit of shelter, and then there was probably a 15-metre green strip out from those trees back into the playing fields where a little bit of protection and the subsoil moisture that's in that water table is sitting there feeding those plants from underneath. But yeah, we're feeding from under the soil.
A couple of years ago, I live on Mount Bolton, or on the slope of Mount Bolton. We had a big fire on top of the mountain, which was basically Crown land.
Yep.
And it burned really fast fire, burned everything. And
I know what those are like at the moment.
But the way the water has flown onto our farm since then, since that debris has gone, it's just been extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's so much faster. I mean, we actually had flooding of the paddocks, which is a bit unheard of. So you can really see it just in very localised areas.
Yeah.
There's been a change in the understory and where the trees are gone. Yeah.
And it's one thing I didn't talk about with the holistic framework. So when we're planning in our holistic framework, we're planning our whole under management, which might be your family, your farm. But what we're looking is we're not independent of those holes around us, and that's an example there where I've got a neighbour that what he does affects me, and what I do affects someone else, both within the landscape, but also within our communities. So we've got a conscious effort on our farm. We run workshops on the farm, and we're on the edge of a little village, Wallamombi village. There's a shop there, so we try to get them to do the catering for our functions. It's not the cheapest, might not be the best food. It's good food, solid little village shop. But I want to contribute to that community as how my whole under management is affecting my community, and those are the decisions that we make. So then that's an example as we're being influenced and we're influencing that. Craig Carter, he's on Blackville. He has a similar thing where it rains on top of the hill and he ends up with the top dressing of soil down his creek.
Good biochar, Robert.
Yeah.
There are advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah. And there's strategies you can do. Tenterfield Council, I've been talking with them. We've been talking to them about building hydrology of their water catchment. They're down to about 160 days of water for the town at the moment, and along with crisis management of getting water for the town, there was a couple of people within that have had some experience with holistic management and planned grazing, got us in to start talking to the councillors and some of the engineers and things to say, well look, if you guys support some development within your catchment, we can start to look at how we might improve the whole catchment of this dam and make it more sustainable. A month after that fire went straight through Tenterfield, and that went straight across that catchment. So about 70% of the catchment that they were hoping to get runoff into the dam has now all been burnt, and so now they're worried about ash and things getting into the dam, and they can't treat it because the water, bacteria can get between pieces of ash. And so they were looking, going, oh, we'll put up structures, and I was sort of saying, well, what if instead of putting up a structure, we're feeding cattle already, what if we ran out a strip of hay around the contour and we fed the cattle on that strip, so when the rain hits it, we've stopped the water, we've increased the minerals that are there from the cattle being there and breaking up the ground. We've got a hay there to start cycling, and we can actually not just put up a bank that diverts it, we're actually doing multiple things at the same time. So there's things we can do with those situations, and putting in buffer zones and tree lines and swales and things. So there's a whole range of stuff. So within the framework, we have a set of tools that we have available, and as Brian says, we have a toolbox, we want a tool bag, we want to open it wide. And that includes, like I'm not here, I'm one of 14 or 15 HM educators in Australia. I'm sure that most of them will not tell you not to or to do something, okay? How you use the tools depends on your context and what you're trying to achieve in your situation. So money and labour are ones that we can't use independent of the other tools. We need to use them. You know, we put money on the table out in the paddock, it's not going to do anything. We can use it to do something, and our effort can be done it. Technology and human creativity seems to be where we're always grabbing stuff out of the toolbox. You know, GMOs and new tractors, and you know, I was at a place yesterday and he's got a keyline plough in one shed and a Podolinsky soil renovator thing in another shed, and you know, so look, you know, there's plenty of technology around. The ones we're going to look at today with our grazing management is how we can use grazing and animal impact. It'll have an influence on living organisms, which includes your cover cropping, your pasture cropping, your biology, you know, Johnson Sioux composts and those sort of things. We're talking about small animals, but all living animals within that system is that. But we'll look at grazing and animal impact. So how we use grazing and animal impact is that we've got management factors that we can use to look at how long we're grazing a paddock and how long we let it recover for. We can affect our stocking rate and our utilisation of that pasture, so how much of it we're eating at any particular time, and the density of our animals on that area as well, and things like number of paddocks that we have available affect those things. So the summary of the things we'll probably do is we look at decreasing mobs, and Brendan raised some issues that we have challenges around some of our existing management practices that make that fairly complex. Running more paddocks, higher densities so we can get the impact, and we're planning and monitoring, which is the key. The process of doing the planning and then the monitoring, so we'll make a decision about doing something. So, sorry, Yep. was talking about, you're talking about, the water coming down the hill. Like, we might say, okay, well, we'll do the hay thing, like I said. Well, how do we know that it's worked? What are the things we can put in place to make sure that we've made that decision? Is it going to work? And what we try and find is what's the earliest indicator that we might be able to see of what might happen. So if I did that, what sort of indicator, if I'm going to put the hay across the countryside, what's an indicator that we might look at to say this is actually working? Before rain falls, what might be something we look for?
Infiltration?
Yeah, we could do an infiltration test ourselves, yeah. So we could see that the actual surface is broken, so we could see that. If we get a small amount of rain, we might actually start to see a change in the litter breaking down under that hay. So we can find indicators there that says, oh, actually this is working. Or we might do it and it hasn't done anything. And we go, well, this is not going to work. Okay, well, instead of waiting another year for the rain to come and go, well, that was a failure, we'll go, okay, what's the early indicator we can say and make a change. Check, get another decision, go back into our toolbox, get our human creativity was over that side. What else can we do? How else might we be able to solve this problem? With our monitoring, with our grazing, it comes into monitoring our plants, what type of plants we have in the king, how they're being impacted by our animals, how much is in the paddock when they leave, what's it look like recovering, and we've got some checks there we can do. We use pasture cages in growing seasons and different things, and then we suggest you do monitoring spots that you do on an annual basis, where we look at quite a variety of things in the biological monitoring, but you look at type of plants, the species, the infiltration, whether you've got any capping, whether you've got runoff, whether you've got litter banks and a whole range of things. And you can monitor those and see that you're actually improving things over time. So if you're not, you can make adjustments. Or you're looking at your animals. Are my animals performing how they need to? And have I got problems with nutrition? And that can be done every time you move them in and out of the paddock, and we'll look at that as well. So, Brendan's given us a few. But what are some of the management factors that we're having to deal with when we're managing our grazing? Rainfall? So we had lambing and joining. Take that off. What else?
Stocking rate.
Stocking rate. Weaning.
Self-replacement month.
Self-replacement. Crops.
Railway lines.
Sorry, railway lines, yep. Yep, railways, roads. Yep.
Soil degradation.
Yep. Soil degradation. What about, sorry?
Drenching.
Drenching, animal husbandry. Okay. What about Christmas?
What about Christmas?
We're going to take a break off, holidays, Christmas, people, moving stock, not moving stock, checking lambs. What else? Anything else?
No times of shearing.
Yep, shearing. So, sorry.
Weather conditions, hot, cold.
Yep, weather. Hot and cold. Yep.
We got rainfall in there.
Yep, we had rainfall.
It's also water availability.
Yeah, water availability. Yep.
Does that come down to storage as well?
Yep. And storage.
Supplementary feeding.
Yep, supplementary feeding. Yep.
Some areas it's neighbours as well.
Yeah, neighbours. Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
Yep. Not really the right place to put your stud cattle in the paddock next to the neighbour's bull. Yep. Or your pigs. Yeah, buffer zones with pigs and things. Yeah. So
Pasture species.
pasture species. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So, and Brendan's talk was excellent because it alluded to all of this stuff. This is the complexity that we're managing. So, the human brain, we can deal with one or two things at a time, but when you start getting to this level of complexity, it starts to get difficult. We start to forget things, or we'll make decisions, or we'll create habits and we'll do things that way because then we don't have to think about it. This happens automatically. So what we're trying to do within the planning process is have a way that we can manage that complexity. So we can put it into a plan. We can take account of all of these things, including drought, to be able to manage that complexity and make it easier. And one of the things that I like from a regenerative point of view is we're looking at creating businesses that don't necessarily rely on one or two people. If you're creating a plan like this, a grazing plan, it gives you something where you can actually have other people help, and you can give options for changing the way your business is set up. And that's part of creating a regenerative business around our our farms as well. And the other thing is using our animals as a tool. So as we've seen, we're looking at those 4 ecosystem processes and how we can utilise a great solar powered tool that walks around our paddocks, and Nat's got these great ones that are a little bit littler that my daughter calls bacon flavoured dogs that self-replace themselves very well, and are good ploughs and other things, and you can use all sorts of different animals within the system, so using them as a tool. So just see where I'm up to so the planned grazing, and we might pull up for morning tea after this, is about getting your animals in the right place at the right time for the right reasons. So we've got management things we have to take in. What paddock do we lamb in? what paddock to, when do we need to get them to the yards for animal husbandry, when, you know, we'll see our example later this afternoon, and my wife's been sitting there fighting fires with her father in the last 2 days at home. You know, when do we have fire? Can we use grazing to help manage, you know, the impact of that? And for the right reasons is, you know, are we improving soils? Do we need animal impact in the area? Do we need to fix a problem with the plant or with the soil or to capping or, you know, those sorts of things. So, so animal nutrition is another reason. Grass management, impact improvement, animal husbandry, seed calving and those sorts of things. So I think what we'll do is we'll pull up there, because we're back to our framework. Before we had a break, we were talking about, you know, what plant grazing is about. You know, getting your animals in the right place at the right time for the right reasons. So we had a whole range of reasons and some management factors that we've got to take into account. And so within the framework, grazing is down here in the planning. So for those that aren't familiar with the framework, as I said, it starts with looking at our vision, our statement of purpose and our context. And there's some components of that, our quality of life statement and our future resource base that we do. And that's sort of what we're trying to make decisions towards. It then moves down and talks about the ecosystem processes, which we've just gone through, those 4 things that sustain life, and then the tools that we can use to manage those ecosystem processes. This next one is the testing questions or the checking questions, and we'll look at those in our monitoring. So they're the things that we use to help make decisions about test the decisions we're going to make to actually move us towards our context. And they go through to make sure we're balancing those social, economic and environmental things so that we're actually heading towards our context within that framework. And each of these 7 questions, from cause and effect, weak link, margin reaction, energy source, and that, go through those 3 legs of the pot. The management guidelines go in line with your tools, and then here we've got financial planning, land planning and grazing planning as the plans that sit within our business management. And then, as we were talking before, when we do our plan, we monitor it, we look at a control and we replan as we need to. So when we're planning, talking about the cycles, we're planning in growing and non-growing. So our growing season is when our grasses are actively growing, we've got growth, and those in here you've probably got a fast growing and a slow growing one where you've got that slow winter. You know, you'll get your rain but you're not getting the heat and the sunlight to do it, so we'll look at that. And your non-growing is when grass isn't growing. You've got bulk there, whatever's in the paddock is what you got, so we have to manage it. You have to work out what to do. So in our growing season, we're growing forage, we're increasing forage. And our aim within that season is to grow as much as we can and feed our animals and have some left over. When we get to our non-growing season, we're then starting to use it until we would have, you know, a break in season. When do we normally get rain? When we start to get growth. You know, in the New England, we talk about a green date being sort of mid-October. I'd love to see it this year, it'd be great. But then we start back into our growing season again. This area here is our drought reserve, so we're talking about managing drought. So we can look at how we manage that and what we do with that. So how do we do it? As we were talking about, we're using our grazing chart, and we use a thing called an aide-memoire. That's what Savory calls it. I did some work with RCS and working with businesses, and it's like a business blueprint. It's a blueprint of how you go through the process of things. So this is actually that's not the one. There's 2 here. There's a non-growing and a growing season one. So this is the full one. In the handouts there, if you grab those on your table, you've got a summary of the steps that are in this. These you can, for $10 US from the Savory Institute website, you can buy the grazing pack of ebooks. which these are 3. There's actually 4 ebooks for $10, which includes these, which is the full thing. And we'll go through it this afternoon, but this takes you through step by step, so you can then follow through and do your own plan, and you'll be able to do it from this. So it's designed that way, so you can do the process and know that you'll get that plan at the other end. So we'll go through. The summary one there gives you the basic outline of the steps that we use. So as I said, in the growing months, it's about what the land can produce, the maximum amount of high quality forage, and be on an increasing basis. So we'll look at after we've done our non-growing, I'll come back into the growing season and show you how we use our monitoring and what we do to actually be able to, in theory, it doesn't always work this way, have an increasing amount of forage through the season when we're managing our stock. And from a non-growing season, we're looking at saying we want adequate forage for the stock that we have on hand, or have the appropriate stock on hand for the forage that we have. And in this case, livestock. A question yesterday for me when I was doing things is, what do we do about the kangaroos? And we'll show you that. You put them on your plan. So you can do an estimate, have them on plan, you can take account of them, because our focus here is on animals as a tool and how we improve those ecosystem processes. So part of us running a business is we need animal productivity. So we've sort of got 2 components here we're managing, and we'll look at how we do that. But we want to make decisions around improving that future resource base. And if we focus on improving the future resource base of those 4 ecosystem processes, we'll actually start to increase our business over time. So any one year we might not, and it's a change in mentality too, to go from I got the highest price at the sale yard, or I got the biggest cow, to how much did I produce this year per hectare or per unit of production. So, my father-in-law, I love him, he's pretty old school, but he rings me every time, sale price, yeah, we got this today. So that's great. That's good, Nigel, that's great. And he's great, he produces great cattle. Beautiful cattle, they're EU certified, and he's really proud of them, and that's fantastic. When we're looking at what we do on a per hectare basis, and what I do is he looks at it and just shakes his head at me. But anyway. And when we're looking at it is that we can manage drought effectively, so we'll look at how we do a drought reserve, and also managing drought as far as the decisions we need to make around our stock to do that. And that, from a productivity point of view and making a profit, that our nutritional requirements of our animals, whether they're pregnant animals or production animals, are met. And another key feature of this planning is that we're actually minimising the stress of the animals and the people involved. We're not trying to rush around and do activities and have accidents or whatever else, or we're not here because this is happening and I'm supposed to be off with the kids doing something at camp draft or whatever else, so we haven't had a holiday for 2 years. It's this balancing of it. If we don't have good people and happy people, then what are we doing what we're doing? So through the planning process, we get maximum coordination of all of these things that you guys put on the board here, including things like cropping and pasture cropping, so we can plan those activities in. So we're over at McIver Farm at Turrapbrook this week, and anybody know McIver Farm with their pigs? Yeah. So they do a rotational grazing with their pigs. They don't have any static pig paddocks at all. They all rotate. So they've got infrastructure that they can move through, and they're rotating them through, and on their plan, once those pigs move through a section that has been grazed, Jason is coming through and sowing in a pasture crop in behind them, so that they then have got feed, and then they're in a growth phase at the moment, but they're also putting cattle into that rotation as well. So they're planning all that in their grazing plan. So, and from the pig operations, nothing against your pig operation, but of the pig operations I've seen around the world, it's one of the best ones I've seen. It's from the soils, so they're on light, friable granite soils, and they're sitting at 80-90% ground cover most of the time. And I think the day that they did their inspection for their new ticket thing, they were probably on the lower end, and Belinda she's going, oh, she was really worried about it and didn't like it, and the guys from the department going, wow, this is amazing, you guys are doing great. So, they've set themselves a much higher benchmark, and they're able to maintain that ground cover with pigs on that area. So, and we might have other uses of our land. So, my parents' place, they've got bow hunting on the farm. So we look at putting into the plan when we're going to be lambing. You don't want, bow hunters are pretty low impact. They can be wandering around, you'll never know they're there. But you also don't want them walking through your lambing ewes and things like that. So you can plan those in and make sure some of those sorts of things. There could be all sorts of stuff you put into the plan. So, and the personal schedules of who's going to do it. When are we going on holidays? When are we going to go to the unit at the coast, or when do we have to go to Sydney for the band camp or the camp draft or to the Melbourne show? All those sorts of things you put onto the plan. So, because we're trying to, as we said, we're getting to this quality of life. What do we want to do? How do we want to live? What makes us happy? How do we enjoy it? And we're building that resource base based on those 4 ecosystem processes to make sure we're doing it. And I know I keep coming back around to that same thing, because that's the essence of it. So the basic is, how much do animals eat? What do different sized animals eat? And what about different types of animals? So what we'll do, so we've got picture here, dry season, growing season, non-growing season here. And when we look at trying to standardise our units for our measurement, so I'll go through this. I do get to DSE. So we're in DSE country usually. Everybody mainly use DSE for the measurement? Yeah. So when I used to run the profit probe, the benchmarking for RCS, we had 4 different measures. So it's DSE down here, LSU up north. Trying to think what it was in South Africa, and a different one for America. They're all just different terms and had ratios that we could use to do it. So as we know, one standard animal unit is a 450 kilo dry cow or steer at maintenance. So that, and how much feed that cow eats is an animal day. So it's a day of grazing to sustain that animal. Now, we're doing this as a base. Productivity changes, so this is at maintenance. If you're trying to grow stock and put on weight and things, you have to make adjustments for those, but we'll go through this, and this is at maintenance level. So if we look at that in kilos, a 300 kilo steer who's growing at 1 kilo per day, I know it's a bit small, needs 10 kilos of dry matter, or 10 DSE. So 1 kilo, or 1 DSE will eat 1 kilo of dry matter in a day. So if he's growing, he needs 10. Over here we've got a 60 kilo ewe with lambs at foot, and she'll be eating 3 kilos a day. They've got here is 3 DSE. You'll know your stock and what it be, and we'll all have slightly different variations, and they'll change through the year. So we take that into account into our planning. So we'll have pre-lambing, post-lamb lactation, and same with cattle. So 1 cow for 100 days equals 100 animal days of feed. So we talk about this thing of animal days. How much feed do we need to feed an animal for a day? And we use this calculation as we create the. So 10 cows for 10 days equals 100 animal days. Same. 1 cow 100 days, 10 cows 10 days. Or 100 cows for 1 day. So it's a simple conversion. So as I said, we got, if you see standard animal unit, it's equivalent to an LSU. The savoury and the holistic management stuff talks about standard animal units, which was more the American thing. So I'm starting to introduce LSU and DSE into the works. So cow and a calf, 1.5 standard units. A wean calf, 0.5. It's actually probably a little bit less than that. And a bull 2. Now there are tables we'll get to here in a minute to that. So 1 DSE is a sheep animal day. So it's how much feed does a sheep need to eat for a day. And he eats about a kilo. And we'll go out here in a minute and we'll have a look at what that looks like outside. So 7 DSEs, which is 1 LSU, is 1 standard animal unit from a conversion. If we've got different animals, pigs, various other things, 6 goats, 10 grey kangaroos, this is all so that 1 LSU, like standard animal unit, these are the equivalent ones of it. And if you looked on the web, you can get there's some slight variations, but they're all fairly similar.
How many sheep was it, sorry, the equivalent of that? 6.9.
7. 1 standard animal unit equals 7 DSEs.
So just a little bit more than the goats.
Yeah.
But that's not dairy goats,
They'll be different again. Yeah, they'll be different again. Yeah. And this is at maintenance too. Yeah. And Brian, some of this is Brian's stuff. He always puts in how many elephants does that do. I have no idea how many elephants it is. But we can come up with a figure for whatever stock we've got. And we've got, I've seen people have got guinea fowl and meat birds and rabbits I've seen. Trying to think of what else is. Horses, yeah. All of those. The Pandarus tables or the DSE tables, you can get these online. RCS have got some for download if you just search DSE stock tables. And so what this is so this is adult merino sheep. You've got a live weight, whether they're dry, pregnant or lactating, whether they're single or twin. And you can get the rating. So when we know how many stock days we're needing to plan when we're doing our planning. And we've got crossbred sheep, crossbred lambs, merinos, and equivalent for cattle as well. And you could make, if you're doing pigs, you could work out a table, and there's probably data there on the pigs. Pigs and chooks are a little bit different because they're omnivores and we're supplementing them as well. We need to take that into account. So to assess our forage volume, so this is the next thing. So we've got animals, we know how many animals, we know approximately how much they eat. So now we need to have a look and say, how do we work out how much pasture that we have available? We can use feed samples, and we'll go out and do that in a sec, or we can use previous non-growing season figures. So when you got your plan for this year, you pull out your plan for last year and go, okay, well this is what we did, this is what the season looked like that year. Is it going to be the same, similar, different? Can I use those as starting figures? We took over some lease from my parents. Dad had his grazing charts and what his productivity was, and he's got it broken down on what his stock days per 100 millimetres of rain is. And he knows historically, he's tested that against different rainfalls through 20 years. So he can say, here it is, at this level of rainfall, this is how many stock days this country will run. That's our carrying capacity. And I had like 4 different levels. We looked at where rainfall was, came on and said, okay, we were equivalent to probably the lowest one he had, which was about 2002, when we had that drought then. And then we went conservative under that when we started our planning at that point. So we can use that, and have that historical data is great. But in starting off, we can use our feed samples to do that. The other ways you can look at it, so we can utilise, and Judy Earle uses this. I don't think you can get these anymore, but you can.
Yeah, I picked them up at the South Australian Land Care Conference, and they have them there in booklets. They are available through the MLA.
Okay.
If you go on the website.
Judy, you can't see it, it's just a wooden ruler. So I just converted this onto a ruler, and it's a per centimetre, and she's got some data on her website that shows you. And what that is, so at 1 centimetre we're looking at, this is at, and I'll get into the next bit here, so it's looking at 250 to 300 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, density, sorry, and at 1 centimetre is 300, and it goes up in how many kilos of dry matter. So if you're looking at a sheep at maintenance eating 1 kilo a day, you can work out with this how, and what you do is you come in to the paddock and where the bulk of the grass is, so you know the top of the grass might be up here, but if you put a light folder sort of weight onto it, where that sort of sits down and measure that, that gives you an indication of how many kilos of dry matter it is. So that's one way of doing it. This is Judy's calculation. So as an example here, and this example's in your handout. This is looking at planting. So we get that data, we've gone out in the paddock and we've said we've got starting herbage mass here of 1921 kilos of dry matter per hectare. In this one we're planting from the 1st of April to the 30th of October. We've got 214 days that we're planning for. We know that we've got that much feed in the paddock now. We want to keep 1,500, so Judy's got some data there on the amounts to leave. So she used to say about 1,000 to 1,200 for sheep. She's sort of brought that up a bit now so that we can get some, and that allows that pasture to better recover and keep that bulk and keep the mineral cycling and things. So we want to keep 1,500. That means we've got 1.97 per kilos of dry matter per day per hectare. So we've got 1.97 kilos of dry matter per hectare per day. In this case, we've got no growth. So we're doing this is a non-growing. If you're in a growing season or you had some growth, like your slow growing period through winter, you could say it might produce 1. There's some data online that's come out of the CSIRO research and various ones that actually give you your average, and it'll show you on a seasonal basis. Our place, we average across the year 6.5 kilos of dry matter production per year, per day, sorry. Achill on one side is about 7.5, and Wollomombi Station on the other side of us is 3. So, because they always got too much stock, and it's a long-term average of satellite imagery and some assessment of climatic stuff. So there's some things around to see what your long-term average is and what the last 5 years, last 2 years is available. So in this case, we're doing a non-growing, so we're not putting any growth in there. We've got, for this one, we've got 400 kilo steers. And at maintenance we're doing 7, so we're just looking at a maintenance budget, maintenance plan for these. We just want to keep these steers and just run them through this non-growing season. So if we, sorry, I'm just trying to, available feed divided by the number of stock, which means we'll have 0.28 of a DSE per hectare. So based on this growth rate with these cattle, this animal, we can run 0.28 of them on each hectare we have. In this case we've got 675 hectares, so our total stocking capacity is 190 based on this plan. Now if you've got more than 190, you've then got some decisions to make. Okay. The stack, this is a stack method, it's very similar. Basically it just says sole, you're down around 300 or 330. If you go to the top of your toe, that's where the bulk is, then you're looking at 650. Ankle, about 980, and calf, you're looking at 1300. So when Judy Earle's saying we want to keep 1300 into the paddock, that's where she's talking about getting us down to. And they've done that based on the data they've seen on recovery of grasses after grazing. The other way is through feed squares. So that's going out and assessing based on this sort of thing, then with feed squares. So what a feed square is that I'll go out in my paddock and I'll have a look and I'll say, how much of this, what's the size of the square I'd be happy, let's do it on a sheep, to stick a sheep in for a day. Okay, so you can assess that, and we'll pop out and do that, and we'll have a look at that. And you can go across your paddock and go, And 2 people, you can stand there, you can stick your hat in the ground and the ute and get the dog to sit and go, well, we're happy there? No. What about that? And you keep going back until you go, okay, yeah, I'd be happy to put a sheep in that area for a day. You work out the area of that square, work how many of those you got per hectare, and it gives you that assessment. Very similar to the kilos, but it's more of a out in the paddock, let's look at it, what are we doing? And you can easily do that all the time. You're going into the paddocks and just doing a quick assessment, calculation. And in your handouts here, you have this table in there. It's on about, what's that, page 4. So this table gives you what the diagonal of the square is. That gives you what the square meterages of that square is, and then how many animal days per hectare that means. So it's a little ready reckoner.
Where does pasture quality come in? Yeah.
Pasture quality, yeah. So you need to make that assessment on when we go out and have a look at it now. We'll discuss that out as we go out and have a look and say, yeah, is it a maintenance one? Because mostly in your dry season, your pasture will hay off and it'll still be brown, like, golden. The nutritional quality of that is still pretty good. It's only when it starts, when we talk about resting country and it being over rested, it's when it starts to go grey and oxidising, which means that all the nutrients disappeared out of it. For us, in our country, in the winter, we get that, we build up a bulk through our summer growing period, and then in autumn we'll do our charts. That winter feed will supplement with a brew, or we use lick blocks with a bit of urea and things in it, so that they get that protein and a bit of bypass protein coming in and doing that. In the summer, knowing your species and varieties and what your requirements are of your stock. Yeah. So if you feel the pasture's a bit lower quality, then you'll adjust how many animal days are in your square that you think needs. You'll make your square bigger because they'll need more.
But pasture height will also affect quality as well.
Yeah. So the question was around quality, and I don't have my rubber here. So as that pasture grows, we're on our growth curve as we do. So once pasture's up into this area, we're reducing in quality once it gets right up, and down here we've got lower quality. So we're aiming to try and graze in that phase 2 period. Now the thing is, and there's a lot of people who talk about, only graze it down to this level, and Judy does that a little bit, but it's a more average across, because you can't stop stock, and we're just about to go into grazing and overgrazing. You can't stop stock eating stuff to the ground. If they go into the paddock, they'll go and find the ice cream and they'll hit it to the ground. So especially in our growing season, in the non-growing, they'll always eat the best stuff. So our non-growing stuff we're saying basically we've built it to here and it's hayed off. We've gone into senescence probably in a lot of it, or it's just stopped growing because we've lost moisture and things. So we're just looking at this as effectively like you're feeding hay out of your shed, but we're maintaining that grass in the paddocks so that we can have the ecological benefits of it there as well. Knowing where you are in that growth cycle and making account for it comes into a nutritional thing, and we talk about nutritional planning in other parts of the course, but it's knowing your stock. You know the supplementation you would be doing, and it's making assessment when you're in the paddock to say, well, do I think this is good? Is it all new season annuals? Well, if it is, you probably have to do some supplementation with them and give them a more area to make sure that you're going to maintain that. And then it's monitoring. Because as you're moving from paddock to paddock, we'll go through monitoring, you'll be able to do dung scores and testing and checking as well to say, oh, actually, I need to get some more roughage because it's going through them, or it's not enough, so you can make some adjustments of supplementation at that time as well in our monitoring. So, all right. So we will all head out through the back there. So if we're looking on the kilos of dry matter one here, we're less than a centimetre of growth, and then in your handouts there's a density rating. This one would be in the probably the 200 kilos of dry matter per square metre, and you're under a centimetre. So you're about 200 kilos of dry matter per hectare, which what we say here, we were sitting at we're sitting at 50, so we've sort of estimated probably a bit more than if we actually did the kilos on it. So we're probably about here somewhere, and that would give us 20 per hectare. No. So at the moment we're just assessing the feed that's in our paddock, so then we can go back and do the plan. So we can say, well, this is how, on the grass I have in the paddock at the moment, because if you put them into this sort of country in the winter, they'll eat, if you left them there, they'll eat it down to it. So as you're planning your rotation through, you can go down. And as far as, and we'll look at overgrazing, if this is not growing, you can't overgraze it. Because where overgrazing happens, there's two things that cause overgrazing. Staying too long, so when a plant is growing and you graze it off, it'll start to grow again. Because it doesn't have any leaf, it uses root energy to start growing again. So if where plant's using its root energy starts to grow to put leaf up again, and we come and graze it again, it goes, bugger, I've got to get more root energy. And it starts root energy to grow again. If we graze it again, it still hasn't put anything back in, it's still going for root energy. So eventually it'll just go, I've run out of energy and die. Now if we graze it and then it goes back and it starts to grow, we take the stock off, but it hasn't got that to fully replenish the energy that's put into, that's taken out its root to start again, and we graze it again, it goes, oh, okay, I've got to use root energy again. And the cycle of using root energy will be a little bit slower, but eventually it'll disappear again. It will overgraze it. It'll run out of energy and it'll disappear. Its root mass will decrease because it'll eventually start to die off. I'm there to show you what GDL showed, did some research on that. But when it's not growing, so when you've got a grass here, so we've got here Vulpia, what's this one? Brome, okay. So it's stopped growing. It's an annual for you guys, is it? Yeah, so it's stopped growing. So we can't overgraze it. We eat it off, what's it do? Nothing, sits there. If it was a perennial, that's probably a perennial. There's some constant in there, I think. Right, so if we hit a perennial, oh yeah, and we eat that off and it's not growing, it'll just sit there. So if we came back and took a bite, we didn't eat it all, and the sheep come back and it took another bite, it hasn't regrown, so it's not using any energy up. It's not until it starts to actually grow that we can actually overgraze it. Now we'll have an impact on its ability to regrow if we graze it right now, but that's a different, the speed of its recovery is different to the overgrazing. It won't, we're not depleting it as a plant unless we're staying too long or coming back too soon. Okay, so in this case today we're focusing on really our non-growing. We'll show you how to monitor your growing, because that's where you guys are up to. You're at the end of your growth. From now on, you're pretty much, most of you will have no more growth. So what here, this is your paddock, that's what you've got until it starts. So when's your growth start again?
Hopefully April.
April? Yep. So April, still a bit of warmth, and you start to get that rain coming through.
Yep.
So you got to make this paddock go from now until April.
In the assessment of animal days, does the table take into account wastage due to treading down?
No.
No. So you allow for that?
You'll have to allow for that, and we'll look at density and stuff in that. Yep. And you'll assess it as you go too. Like, you can, how you allow for that is you can say, when you're doing your assessment, you say, okay, well what percentage do I think, if it was fairly dense, but even if it was trampled on the ground, sheep will eventually eat it anyway. Leak right down to the dirt, but you don't want them to. But you'll say, okay, there's going to be a percentage trampled, so let's just make our days a little bit bigger. Or if it's a better quality, it might be more of the Costwood or fescue or something. We'll say it's a bit better quality, we've changed that and adjust it. Alright, so we'll just go down to where this last group was down here.
We started a bit far apart and we've left a lot of gaps there.
But it's fairly
we
aligned,
only
maybe.
add more food to it.
Yeah, that's right. There's a little bit more in there. So in this case, we've got about 4. Now, as far as what you leave or everything else, so if you want to leave more than that in there, then say, okay, well, take it off a little bit lower and say, okay, well, let's leave a bigger space. And it's adjusting what you think within that scale. The great thing about this table, as I said, mine's laminated, it's in my paddock book. I can walk across, and you've got to walk. You can't do it from your ute. You've got to get out.
Or you drone.
Has anybody heard the best fertiliser is 2 boots on the ground? Get out, walk. Get out, have a look. And when we're talking about our monitoring as well, having a look at what species we've got. So we've just been walking across. We've got Phalaris in here as our perennial grass. There's some clovers. Clover here, that'll be perennial as well. And as you, trying to see what else we've got here, there's a couple of forbs and things in here.
Wouldn't that clover be annual? No, it's annual, it's sub-clover.
Sub-clover, is it?
Yep, sub-clover.
Oh, okay. I thought there was some white clover just back there.
No, it's too dry.
Okay.
White clover here. You've got
bigger leaf than our sub-clover.
This is all rhodium, which is an annual weed.
Yep. So what we want to do is if we're going to improve those 4 ecosystem processes, we want perennials, don't we? So one of the things we need to be careful of, especially in our growing season, is that we're not overgrazing those perennials, because if they come in here, they're the first thing they're going to go for. They're the ice cream. Your stock are going to go, oh, like that, that's it, I'm going to go there first. So when you're setting how your graze period for a paddock, it's based on your best species in your paddock, not the total paddock. Because if you do it on the total paddock, they'll have been gone, they'll have started to regrow, and they'll be eaten again and they'll disappear. So this is the problem we have on our place. I've got good summer perennials, our summer dominant perennials. I should have winter perennials and clovers and things as well, but because he kept the same stock, my previous owner kept the same stock winter to summer, what was fine through summer, he's gone into winter, and every time a bloody perennial sticks his head up, just getting eaten off and they've disappeared. So we're looking at reducing our stocking rate through our winter period so that we can make sure we can look after those perennials, the things we want. So we're going into the paddock. Our focus is usually, so you know what the weed is. Everybody will know what the weeds are. Okay, here's the competition, right? Someone name me 5 good perennials, native and introduced, you want on your pasture. Marcolina. Ryegrass. Perennial ryegrass. Phalaris. Coxwood.
Wallaby grass.
Dantonia, wallaby grass. Okay, good. Phalaris. Panicum, windmill grass. They're the ones we need to be focusing on to say, where are they? How am I impacting? What's my grazing looking like when I'm going into the paddock? We focus on, and Brian's a classic on this, we focus on things with teeth and stripes. Where's the weed? Where's the blackberry? Where's this? Where's that? My neighbour came on when I bought the place and he says, oh, you got love grass and chili needle grass and everything. And I'm going, I don't know, part of the diversity for me. And in actual fact, I don't have chili needle grass, but I've got love grass. I've got coolisai grass. I've probably got, what was all the other ones? Oh, there's another couple of ones. I definitely have them.
You get silver grass up there?
The bulb. Oh yeah, yes we do. Yeah.
They don't like to eat most, do they? We used to be able to grow. We used to have pastures used to be based on Victorian perennial rye here. you know, and you'd sow Victorian perennial rye and it'd be there for years. Now, it won't last.
It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
So,
And that's because of these drying seasons.
yeah, so we had a dominant pasture of one species. Conditions changed, it disappeared, and we didn't have anything else.
Oh, no. Well, like we used to sow Victorian perennial rye, Cocksfoot, and Fleurus.
Yep.
And then you'd sow a couple of varieties of subclover, Balanza clover,
Yep.
and on a flat you'd sow lucerne.
Yep.
You know.
But with those perennials, were they sown at the same time?
Yeah.
And when you sowed them, how'd you sow them?
Oh, they were generally undersown under crops.
Under crops?
Yep.
After spraying out all those natives and everything, or not?
Oh, most of the country that's been farmed, the natives aren't here anymore.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
We're in the same position.
Yeah, that's been, you know, cropped.
Yeah.
You generally crop country to clean up the weeds and then sow it down to pasture.
Yeah.
That's the sort of the traditional way to
So the thing is, and excuses to our agronomist here, but most agronomists got rag companies, you know, they'll sell you a seed and say you got to resow it every 3 years because it'll disappear. 3 to 4 years, or maybe 5 years. Perennial is perennial. It should be, if we manage it, it should be able to continue to survive.
We've got a 50-year-old perennial ryegrass paddock still going.
Yeah. And what we're finding, people are finding, as they change their grazing management, they're focusing on those perennials, they're focusing on letting things recover appropriately, and we're improving the mineral and water cycle and those dynamics in there. There are species coming back into pastures that haven't been there for 50 or 60 years. The seed bank is there. I think Judy Earle did a thing. They took a square metre of soil, and I think it was 10 centimetres of that, and they then, whether they actually went through and pulled the seed out or they kept germinating and pulling out and identifying it, whichever way, they worked out there was 100,000 seeds in a square metre, 10 centimetres of soil.
What rainfall was that?
That was on the New England, but I think they did one there. They did a couple of different ones, and they went through and looked at the species mix as well. And it was a variety of species of forbs and annuals and perennials and stuff in there. So the seed banks are there.
Would you expect that in the high rainfall zones though? Where the places have been cropped and grazed for 150 years?
Yeah, it's still there. We're getting grasses come back in our country. You know, you can go in, especially microlina, which is Ratsalfescia vulpea, silvergrass. Like we had so thick in paddocks we were doing, and probably down here, that we would spray top in it to stop it from setting seed, because they were talking about 50,000 seeds per square metre. You had to do that, otherwise it's just kept choking things out. 10, 15 years, we're now getting microlinas in Tanzania and all those ones coming back into the pastures for us. It's down in these southern areas. Even in New England, Richard Macon's got bluegrasses and things coming back into it. And those bluegrasses, they haven't been growing in that. He hasn't planted them because he's improved the carbon in his soil and improving that water cycle and mineral cycle. The environment for those, so that's the thing we're trying to do. A species will come back into an environment when the conditions are right for it to germinate. So we've got to improve, you know, whether it's soil tapping, whether it's compaction, whether it's mineral cycling, available water at the right time for germination, whatever it is for that seed to germinate. That's what we're trying to change, those conditions.
I wonder if super soft phosphate affects that, particularly the natives coming back.
Yeah, super is. Super, I talked to Nicole Masters about super phosphate, and a lot of and as I said, I'm not going to tell you to not put it on. That's up to you guys. What super will do, and a lot of the soluble fertilisers, what we're learning about that soil biology under the soil is that interaction between especially fungi into the plant root, and that swapping exudates for minerals and things like that. Superphosphate, from a phosphorus point of view, it's like the plant sticking a straw on the ground and goes, I don't need you fungi, I'm not going to feed you, I'm just going to get this stuff. And then it disappears and the fungi's gone. He goes, oh, so you got to put it on again. You got to put it on again. So it's what we teach our plants to do in a way, is that they're going, okay, well I can get soluble stuff all the time. I don't need to push exudates out and have that symbiotic relation with that soil biology under the soil.
What about rock phosphate?
Rock phosphate, being that it's slower release and you don't have a high soluble component of it, is better. Yeah. But Christine Jones is looking at this is why when you get your soil test, do your totals test of all your elements, not just the available. Christine Jones is of the thinking and her research saying there's enough phosphorus or all of these elements in the soil. It's just not available. It's locked up. A fungi will dissolve rock. It'll penetrate, it has acids, and it'll start to dissolve rock and penetrate through it. So you can access stuff. And a fungi here that has an interaction with a plant here will be interacting, way out, and as we improve the depth of the oxygen and that in our soils, we'll actually start to go deeper into that soil profile and access more and more of those minerals. So that's the thing, and that's part of that community dynamics. We're not just looking at the community dynamics up here, we're looking at what's under the ground as well, to make sure that what we're doing with our management is we're taking into account of that. Now, from a whole farm planning point of view, it means when we're setting our stocking rates, we then have to look at our enterprise mix and things like when we do our lambing and things like that to better allow us to look after this. Now it might mean, doesn't necessarily, but it might mean in the start that we actually, our income level or something might adjust because we make changes, but our ultimate aim is to increase that resource base and keep improving and increase our profitability over time. Now, what a lot of people are finding with once you get your minerals and things cycling and you start to unlock that in your soil, you're rotating. One, if you're doing a rotation, your drench requirements reduce nearly straight away because you're breaking that worm cycle through your rotation. Is barber's pole a problem down here? It is. Barber's pole's a difficult one because it's so long, and I'm still talking to people about how to manage that from rotation, but there are still some that you need to keep an eye on. But most of the others have a shorter life cycle, that if you're rotating out over 30 to 60 days at least out of that, then you're breaking that cycle and reduce that. Clostridial diseases that we vaccinate for are all nutritional. So anybody read Pat Colby's animal sheep care and cattle care books? If you've read those, you start to get in and understand that they're all nutritional diseases. And there's quite a few people. I was at Sam White's the other day over at Sindonia. He's stopped vaccinating. Because he's got that mineral cycling, you've got nutrition coming through your plants, you're not getting those nutritional diseases affecting it. So if you can, even if you reduce your drenching to once or twice a year and you don't vaccinate, then your cost of production starts to fall. You're not having to replant pastures, cost of production's down. So you're although you might take a bit of a change on your output side of it, you can make sure you adjust your cost of production. When I was benchmarking with RCS, the biggest impact people can make on the business is cost of production. Look at your overheads. Every business, look at your overheads. look there first. And a lot of people, their focus is on genetics and price and things on the other end of it. It's about a 2 to 5% change in your profitability from a genetic point of view. Cost is 40 to 50% ability to change it. It's the bit you have control, and you can decide to do that tomorrow. So in the financial planning that we teach, we look at how you actually go through that planning process to keep a control on those costs. So when I was benchmarking, we'd start off with a overhead ratio, which is the ratio of overheads to our total turnover, of somewhere up around 80%. So 80% of our turnover was being taken by our overheads. The top 30% producers were getting that down to about 30%. Some of the best were down around 20%. So only 20% of your turnover has been taken by your overheads. So, you know, we've got some ability. So even though we're changing our structure, we've got some other things we can do within our business to be able to balance that out. So enterprise mix is some of those things we need to make decisions around, and you can go through and say, okay, human creativity, what are the enterprises could do? You know, we were talking about self-replacing flocks or trading, you know, breeding, whatever, all those different things. We can look at those enterprises and say, well, what's going to best fit? How can I adjust it? Or is there a transition thing that I can do so that I can go back into a more breeding one? That's my long-term goal. That's what I like doing. I want to do it. Can I do it through a transition? So everybody got any questions on doing their feed squares?
Certain times of the year they eat certain things and they don't eat things. I give silver wattles with my sheep sometimes, and certain times of the year they love it and they just couldn't get enough of it. And then the other day I tried to give it to them, no, didn't want it.
Are they exhibiting nutritional intelligence with that?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good thing. Like there was, I think it was republished the other day. There's a lady, I'm not sure where she is, that she's introduced a bit of the Pack Colby stock and gone to the next stage. So they're doing self-weaning of her flock. For her on a small system it works well, from a commercial point of view might not. But one of the things she has is a pharmacy paddock, which has got chicory and various other things that they planted in the pharmacy paddock. So instead of drenching, she'll go, okay, they're looking a bit things, so she'll run them into the pharmacy paddock, give them a graze there and move them out again. So rather than getting the yards and drenching and days, one day or 2 days in the pharmacy paddock and back out again. So
We've noticed with the plantain and the chicory that worm counts seem to be lower.
yeah. And the barber's pole one we were talking about earlier, we worm tested last year and my barber's pole worm count was through the roof, but I was looking at the ewes going, you look fine, and the lambs look fine. They didn't seem to be suffering. Maybe if I drenched I might have got a bit of productivity, but they just didn't seem to. And I think there's some discussion now around some of that natural resistance to having a certain level of worm burden isn't necessarily going to have a major impact on your grazing, but it's a genetic selection thing too.
So did you drench?
Did I drench?
Did you drench them?
Yes, I did in the end, because I looked at it and everybody's going, oh, this is massive, and I drenched, and I probably used the wrong drench because it dropped a little bit but not very much. We also supplemented with copper and sulphur at the same time.
So did you retest afterwards?
Yeah, it did. And it dropped by, I can't think of the figures, it dropped by about 20%, but was still 2 or 3 times the target level, which indicated that there was drench resistance in the barber's pole that was there for the drench I used.
We're the same thing.
We had a huge problem with dairy goats. We had a huge problem at first with barber's pole for running the bucks because they're in a specific paddock.
Yep.
We built another buck paddock, we drenched with the Mectin, and we give them copper and sulphur every day, and our worm burden has dropped right down. But I think it's also climatic.
Yeah.
You know, we expect barber's pole back again this year because it's wet where we are, it's going to be warm.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We had the same early in the season. And it was more like my dad. They had wethers in another part of the farm and they were moving them from paddock to paddock and 2 died. They dropped dead as they were moving them. And he went, oh, shivers, and they just went, oh, they didn't test, they just drenched it. So I tested, I went, oh, mine don't seem to be suffering, so I'll test them, and they went, and I went, oh, okay, maybe. Well, I didn't want to use the Mectins because I want to look after the dung beetles and that other stuff. So, but it dropped, but not very much, which means there was resistance there. But I don't think it was a massive impact for me. But it's an issue we need to look at. So is there any other, back to your feed squares?
Oh, is that a wallaby grass, these green ones? Is these
Yep.
So if you had a pasture of that, how would you manage the grazing of that through winter and summer to maximise your regeneration of that grass?
You make sure you're not overgrazing, and make sure that when you come in, if that's the species that you want, then you base your graze period and your recovery on that species.
So how far would you eat it down and then?
Well, Brian says you can't stop them eating it all the way to the ground.
Yep.
That's severe grazing.
So big mobs on and off quickly. What would be the turnaround time?
Oh, it depends.
Go to the regrowth
Yeah,
then. But you want it to seed. You want growth and seed, don't you?
Yeah. There will be seed in the seed bank. There will be seed in the seed bank. So in your growing season, so if we're in growing season and this is our species we want to look after, right? So we use a cage. So if you get the IBC shuttle cages, it's probably the easiest. They're nice and light and movable. When you put the stock in, you put the cage in, peg it down, and I've got some pictures there on the presentation later. That's your control. So you graze your paddock, stock go out, you move your cage, and then your recovery period is when this grass, as growing season, has recovered its bulk back to what it was when they went in, or equivalent now. Now if you recover it back to that grass, because this grass will be put in the cage will continue to grow, if we let this grass catch back up to it, then that's when we start to get an increase in the amount of grass in the paddock, because we're always going up a little bit more each time. So that gives you an indication of when you come back. If you use your cages, they'll help you monitor what the recovery is. Now, the rule is, if in doubt, slow down, because if you keep speeding up, you'll keep coming back to the paddock faster and faster and faster, and you'll affect every paddock. If you slow down, you might overgraze the paddock you're in, but you're letting the others recover. So you might have a smaller effect if you slow down. So you'll see it's actually written on one of my charts. Just if in doubt, slow down. Just to remind me so that I do slow down. So your challenge down here is to go from an annual based pasture, which is where you are, to get more perenniality in that. So in your as you go in now, between now and April, what rain would you get?
What year?
5 inches or nothing.
Yeah, pretty much.
Sometimes
Big storm in January.
January, just between Christmas and New Year, there's a sudden bang.
So this year we had absolutely no rain between the 1st of January and the 1st of May. And it was the 1st of May. Rain never did stop. It was magnificent.
So yeah, and that's, it's hard to establish perennials in that, but what we'll find is as we increase our carbon levels and we're able to hold more moisture, we'll shorten that non-growing season from either end. So that, Jeff Power from WA over there, friend, and that's what he's done. He replanted his place after one of the big fires went through WA, and that was his focus. He said, I can't eliminate that non-growing, but if I can extend it on the start and bring it earlier on the other end, then that's that time thing we're talking about. We're getting more time in green. So if we're increasing that carbon, then any early rain into April would be then available. And anything that you've had in the winter is going to hold on a lot longer on the start of it. So you end up with those grasses further on. So here, like you can see, your phalaris and stuff it's still green and productive. You know, this stuff, it's gone. It's done its dash. Yeah.
Glen, just quickly, in the group, and we mentioned cover cropping before, so what the majority of us, I suppose, are trying to do is go from an annual based system on degraded soil to a perennial system on productive soil.
Yep.
Where is the role of cover crops in diversity and priming that soil to get from A to point B?
Oh yeah, definitely, because we're trying to improve those ecosystem processes, so mineral cycle and carbon and the water cycle. Having those selective green annual crops in those times that they'll grow means that we're extending it to start with, so we're continuing to pump sugars into that soil and start to get that carbon laying down as well. We've got productivity, so talking about productivity off of these grasses, we can then be able to use those crops to rest, to let other country recover, or extend and not have to take this down as much during a non-growing. And the other thing is the diversity of the root structure. The more, same as the diversity above, the more diversity of the root structure you have underneath, tap roots, fibrous, deep roots, shallow roots, the whole diversity, then the more diversity of the microbes and the biology in the soil associated with those, because they'll all have slightly different mechanisms and be working different ways. And that's where the cover crops, when they're saying minimum of 8 to 9 species in a mix. I think Gabe Brown had 22 or something he put into one mix just as a bit of experiment.
Yeah.
Has anybody seen Gabe's slides of one of the first trials they did with the multi-species? You know, that 8 different ones all died and then the multi-species one's still growing. And that is an example of all that was not any difference in the plots other than diversity of roots. Diversity of roots meant the biology could interact and had that resilience for a lot longer than what one plant could at the time.
Does that mean corkscrew is beneficial?
Yeah.
So you've got to probably try to get rid of it.
We don't. You got to manage it from a sheep point of view. Yeah, definitely got to manage it. And interesting enough, we sold, didn't say this earlier, but this year we sold box lamb for the first time. And I had a bit of grass seed. I had a lot of grass seed in the lambs. A little bit of it come through in the meat, but not a great deal. Enough that because we were doing our own, we could trim it and stuff. But yeah, it's a management issue. The same as someone was saying the barley grass. Yeah, we still have to take those things into account.
What about bent grass?
I haven't had any experience with bent grass.
Is that mat stuff? Oh, I've got trouble with it.
Sam White had bent grass, didn't he?
I think so.
Yeah, and through his grazing, he's getting rid of it. He's used some really high impact, high density on some areas with his cattle. You could do it with sheep, and it's you know, if you've had a patch, you could say, well, let's put. And Graham Hand talks about practice safe to fail places. So fence off a 30 metre by 30 metre section of a paddock, so that, and make it so you can get your stock in there and go, okay, well, what would high density do? Put 1,000 sheep in it, same as your yards, but put 1,000 sheep in it, and then take them out and let it recover for 12 months and see what happens. And then you'll say, okay, well, if I do that, and if it performs well, you can say, okay, well, what can I do across the rest of it? So if you then start getting high density, and you can do some trials in there and do different things in that safe to fail area. You know, Gabe Brown talks about, if he's not failing at something every year, he's not doing his job properly. And I think that's one of the things we've got ourselves in agriculture. We're worried about doing the wrong thing.
Some of us are right now feeling that we're doing everything right in that case.
Just on Gabe Brown there, Glen, I think a really good sequel in the reading is Jerry Brunetti's book, Farmers Ecology, because Gabe Brown references him a lot. And I think reading them both, Gabe Brown first and Jerry Brunetti, is a nice sequence.
Jerry was a good friend. He was a friend of mine.
And he passed on.
Yeah, he's passed away. When that tour you saw at Joel Salatin's, Jerry spent 3 days with us on the tour on that one. Which was the last time I actually spent any time with him, unfortunately. So Jerry Brunetti started his career in golf courses, doing turf and stuff, and then he got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, but actually then started researching nutrition and everything else, and was able to actually put his cancer into remission. But then he got Lyme's disease, and that kept knocking him around, and he did less and less travel. But yeah, eventually he also, his mother was in a nursing home, and they're feeding him rubbish food, so he sort of made up a cocktail of supplements and vitamins and other things, and sort of adjusted a diet, and I can't remember what was wrong with it. It improved it to the point that her doctor came along, and so Jerry said, "What are you doing? Because whatever you're doing there, I want to do with my other patients." And so he then started working with a doctor who looked at nutrition for people, and it's just that we're eating, the nutritional value of our food has declined. But yeah, Jerry's books, they're available for his what's his business? College. I just can't recall it.
You've got the book in the car.
Farmers Ecology. Yeah, Farmers Ecology. It's still available for sale on his business's website. It's still running. So some other people took over his business after he went, or Acres would have it. Yeah. So back to this. So this, once you get, if you go home and do this process yourself, a few places across your paddocks, you'll get a feel for your grasses and your paddocks. And then it's eventually it'll just stick your hat in the ground and you'll go, oh, okay, well, yeah, it's about that. And you can do calculations. And that, with that little ready reckoner, if you round up, you're always giving yourself a bit of buffer in the size available, and you'll get to know it. And then once you've got your plan and you've gone through your plan, when you go to replan next time growing, you've got your actual figures, because you'll record how many actual stock days I took out of that paddock. And then you've got figures to know. So what we might do, I'm quite warm now, I've been quite cold for the last 4 days. But we'll have some lunch, and then after lunch we'll just do a little bit of a few more slides on overgrazing and things, and then we'll get into the actual plan. So does everybody have any questions with the feed squares? I know we've had some questions around taking in different quality of grass, and that's where you take in the change in the size of your square, and you'll know your grasses and make an assessment on that. Is there any other before we move on? So what we were doing with that, and on that little sheet, this little one, so we're working on how many units. So how many days grazing per hectare? So that's standard unit or animal days per hectare. We had a discussion about grazing and overgrazing, so we'll lead into that now too out there. So grazing is that impact point between the animal and the plant. Now it's defoliating the plant, it's eating it down. So, but overgrazing happens plant by plant. A lot of people say, oh, that paddock's overgrazed. But it only looks overgrazed because each individual plant was overgrazed. And it comes from, as I said, staying too long, so when that plant starts to regrow and you eat it again. So if you have a look at, so we've got a plant sitting there with this much, it's got energy, foliage, and we graze it right down. As it regrows, it'll go up like that. So it will regrow and we'll have that S-curve of development in it. At the same time, our root energy that's there, will go along, and when it starts to regrow, drops down. And then as that grows, it starts to replenish that root energy as well. Okay, so we start up here with this level of root energy. Now if we come back in and graze that there, so our plant goes down, our root energy stops and plateaus and drops down. And if we keep doing that cycle, we end up going down there. And we just we use away all that root energy. It can't replenish it. So what we want to do is have that root energy replenished back up to the point up here where it's replenished it back up. It's been able to get it back up. Now it may come back up here, for the sake of the exercise, but it may be later. Now, so this down here will be your graze period. So if we have a shorter graze period, we're going to start impacting that plant if we keep doing it. So if we stay too long, it starts to eat back into that. Or we come back too early before it's got that back up there, then we're impacting on the energy to store in that plant, and eventually it'll run out of it and it'll disappear.
When you say back up there, you mean like ankle or... No,
replenish the energy that it used to regrow itself in the root. So when you defoliate it, it's got no photosynthesis happening. So the only way for it to regrow is to use energy stored in the basal crown and the root structure. So it draws that back up, it stops giving exudates for a period of time because it's not producing any, to the fungi, and it grows plant. So we've got to get it back up until you can get a solar panel and start photosynthesizing again, and then put that energy back in there and get exudates going back out into its roots again. So it's the energy, not necessarily the height of the plant. Yeah.
So this is what haymaking does.
Yeah. So haymaking, come along, get here. Best time to cut it, right about there.
Every year it's gone.
Yeah. Now the length of this graze period, so here is our optimal graze period for this particular graph. That time frame will stretch and shrink in your growing season, depending on whether you've had rain or it gets a bit hot or it's colder or whatever else. It'll shrink and grow, and we'll have a look at that in a minute. But that's when we're saying, graze staying too long, plant regrows about 3 to 4 days. The plant will start to regrow, and that's when you get that chance of the second, what they call the second bite. And how long is too soon to come back depends on where this optimal graze period is for that plant at the time. And as a rule, and you'll see it written on one of those charts over there, if in doubt, as we said, go slower in the growing season. Because then if you're going to impact a paddock or impact your plants, you'll only impact them in the paddock you're in, giving more time for what's in front of you to recover before you get in there. Okay? So, right place, right time for the right reasons. So no non-growing season planting. So now we'll get into doing our plan. We do it at the start of the non-growing season and when we can assess the feed available. So as soon as you can sort of be comfortable to say, I know what's going to be there for me to do my plan, and usually the sooner you can, the better, you do your plan. And you do it that time and then you do a growing season. So we're doing this process at least twice a year. So it's not every month or whatever else, or every week when we do a move. We're doing the planning process twice a year. So to be able to find the time to do that, we talk about a bit of time management during the course to say that within your time, you're just doing a bit of assessment of the things that you might be doing now. And I'm pretty sure there'll be things that probably aren't what Covey calls quadrant 4 sort of tasks. You do them, they're not really productive. So before you can take on something new, you need to let something go. I don't want to give you an extra job to do on top of being already busy. So you need to have an assessment of your time and say, okay, well, what can I actually let go? I don't actually need to do that. I read the paper on 3 days a week. I actually read it on 2 days a week, or for that week of the month, I won't read it. Well, those sorts of things. You can find that time. So, drought reserves. So before, remember we had our chart up there, and we started off, we've had our growth, and we start off, let's say, I'll do that one. Start off the non-growing season with this amount of fodder. So we say, how long is your non-growing season? From what date to what date?
Here it's probably November through to April.
So 180 days. Okay, so let's say we're going to take this fodder through 180 days before we would expect to get the season. And when do you think the last point is before, when we're talking about drought reserve, we're going to hold it in time, and we'll go through the reason for that. We usually add another 30 to 60 days on top of that to say, well, if we don't get, so for us it's coming out of winter into that October period. This is mine up here. So ours is here. I've got a line on here that says this is when we expect it. But my drought reserve is planned out to the end of or mid-December. So it gives me another 60 days. So if that's our non-growing, we actually add another 60 days. So what's that? 240. And this bit is our drought reserve. So we're expecting, we'll do a plan that grazes it to that point, but then have a drought reserve. So the reason we do that is holding a reserve in time rather than a reserve in area. So we heard someone talking about sacrificial paddocks or even, you know, haying stuff and holding it there. If we hold it in time, it produces extra forage for production, increases our flexibility because it's in the paddock. We're allowed to use it, so we can graze it. We're not restricted. And because of maintaining the nutritional value in it, it actually can bring us through better. If we hold it in area, we've got a paddock now, and all that forage is all the same sort of value. But this paddock, we're not going to graze it until maybe 6 months down the track. So between now and 6 months down the track, the nutritional quality of that grass is falling all the time. So that actually when we need to use it, we've lost a lot of nutrition that's in it. Okay? And if we've got, and that's over-resting it, and that means that the grass will deteriorate and we'll actually get a transition in the succession to other species as well. Because that grass will then start to oxidise off all that nutrient value within it. And that, when we were talking about the mineral cycle before, that volatile oxidisation, and we lose those minerals. So once we start doing that, it opens up the ability for other things, we've got the environment for other stuff to come in. And because of that nutrition value, we've got lower performance. So what we'll do is we actually plan here, and we'll go through what it looks like from a nutritional value, and then we add in a time value for our drought reserve into that, so that we know that whatever forage we got in the paddock will actually take us right through to the end of that drought reserve period. Our plan is that this is when we'll get growth, and our grass will start to grow up here in our growing season.
Glen, as you said, the nutritional value falls off, so the NDF has increased significantly. The neutral detergent fibre is a digestive everything. So there'll be a lot of bulk there, but they won't be able to eat a lot of it because of the slow throughput. Yeah, slow throughput. And so therefore, what's lost condition and trying to build use up for joining and canopy. Yeah. So in this one, we'll show you, you'll actually go through, and because of the number of selections we'll do in it, which we'll talk about in our thing, we actually keep a more even plane of nutrition all the way through, even into that area there. Because these paddocks will have already grazed through this period, but we're leaving a little bit so that we've got some left for the drought reserve. All right, so in your notes, you've got a copy of a blank, it's a bit of a modified grazing chart. We've actually got full ones here for you to take home and start your chart. But if you follow along on this one, you can start to draw on it, and on the next page it's actually all of the information I'll start to put on the screen is actually there. So if you follow along, and then you'll have sort of the nearly completed one there for you to have a look at later. So we start first by setting up the chart. So in this middle bit here, we've got our months. In this case, in the charts, you'll see they're in 5-day sections all the way across. In this demonstration one, we've just put the 5 days in the first month just to show you. We've got down here rainfall. I also put in here rolling 12-month rainfall, so I can see where I'm at, and that's what this line here is for me. So I've actually got the little bars here for the rain and when it fell, and then the rolling 12-month as well.
it's got a place there to put any supplemental feed, so we can record that, so that next year when you start to put your plan together, you can say, okay, I know I supplemented those months, and you can take account for that. And up the top we go, okay, what year? And so it's the year, we say 2019, non-growing season, and whatever the property or the cell or the grazing unit you're doing this for. So then we put in across the top the months that we're planning for. When there's a month, because these are in 5-day sections, June has 30 days and 30, oh actually there's the 31 days in those, so you need to blank out the day, so that like February and all the 30-day ones, you blank out a line so you don't include it in your grazing as you go along. So put our months in. And then we put in these two columns, column 4, and next to it we put non-growing and growing, because we'll use that in a second. We just name those columns, and then in these two columns put all our paddock names down. So we list all our paddocks. So right, so we've got, in this case we've got A, B, C through to J, and we've got non-growing and drought. So this will be the amount of graze period. We'll calculate that for our growing, non-growing, sorry, and then the graze period for our drought reserve we'll put there. We put our paddock sizes in. Now if you follow along also in your first page, in your aide memoire, it'll give you the steps that we're following. So this will be, so step 1, we're setting up the chart just so you can follow there. Paddock sizes in the column, and the total size of the grazing unit that we've got going. Our stocking rate, which is, sorry, what your expected stocking rate of that paddock is, or that area is. So in this case, we're looking at 1 stock unit per 4.8 hectares. This is what we're planning at this stage.
That's for the whole farm?
That's for the whole farm, yeah. So the next thing we do is we start recording all of our complexity. So what are the management events, and we started up here with this sort of stuff, that we need to put onto our plan. So in this case we're at calving between the 1st of September and the 30th of October. We've got some school holidays that we want to put on there. There's a unit at the coast that we're going to go and take a breakaway at, and we put those onto the plan. So what we've got down the bottom in this remarks area is we can put on, so it's not going to fall over, is it? Blue line around with our calving. So our expected calving is there. Now a blue line goes around all the paddocks because it affects the whole of the farm, and at this stage we don't know where we're going to be. Okay, so we put it around. Management effect goes across the whole lot. And we label it up the top here. And you can also down the bottom here, I think in this one, I do it as well, is just put a square box and just say calving down there, so you've got some notes on it. We've got school holidays, which we're doing in yellow. Put those in. And then we've got the unit at the coast. We're planning to go to the unit on the coast then. So we need to know all these things before we actually work out, where we're going to be. Because if we're going to be away, we can't move stock while we're away. So we want to have a look at which paddocks we might be in when that's on. And when the school holidays are on, we might have a bit of extra labour or someone to help, or someone might have to go and ride horses or whatever else. Yeah. So. The next part is looking at any exclusion areas. So step 4. So in this case, in paddock A, we've got a stubble quail that it's active between June and September. It's nesting in that area, and we want to make sure we don't impact it from our biodiversity point of view. We've got wheat going into paddock E. We've got some fencing to do in G and H, and we know that paddock I, the water runs out in November, it runs out at the end of the season. So we need to get it, we need to look at that so we can get in there early before the water disappears. And then in this case, we've got something like, we've got mother of millions. So we can't go into this paddock when the mother of millions is flowering, because we'll have some toxicity issues. So it could be, anything on your place. We've got chocolate lilies that flower up on our area. It's actually one of the indigenous foods from the area, and when previously they've been talked about they grow up to a metre tall. Ours are sort of about this, and we've got a couple of paddocks where they're predominant at the moment, and we're trying to protect them and let them seed and develop. So we record that on our, I think, pretty sure it's on one of those charts for the Loxley product, and we record that on there. So these ones, so the stubble kale, we said we can't graze that paddock for that period of time. So we shade in that area. And then down the bottom here, you'll see we've put a little note that says that means stubble quail. We've got our wheat going in. No fences in G and H, so we've got no fences in that section. And our water runs out in paddock I in December, so we need to get into that paddock before that water runs out. And we've got our mother of millions. Oops, sorry. Did that come up there? We've got mother of millions in there. In hashed area. Oh yeah, there it is there, sorry. In there. All right. So then we go, in some of those periods, not all the paddocks are available. So in here, we look at a number of paddocks still available in the area. So in that area, all the paddocks are still available. Because even though these are here, for that whole period, we can move into any of those paddocks. So in that case, we've got here, it's a bit light, but that says we've still got all the 10 paddocks available. For this period, for that whole period, we can't go to that paddock at all. It's gone, it's out of the rotation. So this is so in here we've got in this particular one, we've said that our non-growing season goes through to the end of October, and then this is our drought reserve for November and December. So special management is anything else. So we're still getting our notes together. We're still sort of setting up the process of planning. So we want to be able to do our calving in our biggest paddocks. So we're talking about, lambing and things. So down on mine there, at the back, you can see the 2 paddocks that were in for lambing were a sufficient quality and size for us to stay in there for a longer period of time. We want to wean in paddock J, because it's got the good fences, electric fences and things, and we can wean across the fence there. And we want to graze B, C and D early because of fire, because the wind brings the fire usually in from the northwest. So on our plap, and I didn't include the map in here. I missed that in the thing. There's a little map that goes with this, and I apologise for that. But in that, you got your layout, and it says, yep, these paddocks, usually the fire comes there, so we're going to graze them early, so when there's the threat of fire, we've already grazed it, it's down low, and we don't lose that feed, but we're also reducing that threat at the same time. All right, so then we've got those ones we just went through, calving, weaning, and the fire. So you'll see here, it's quite thin, so we got hash here, we've got some hash in there and hashed in there, so we can just take note when we're actually doing our planning that there's something that's got to happen in that area. So then we assess our forage volume. We go out in the paddock, we do our feed squares. How much have we got available? So we do our feed samples, we look at our previous growing seasons, we look at, as we said, how much does the stock unit use, look in the paddock, work out what it is for our stock. So we enter, and we do that on each of our paddocks. So we'll go through each of our paddocks and make an assessment of what the stock days per hectare is using our little chart. Do our feed square. This is how this paddock, oh well that's so paddock A's got 16, paddock J's got 100 stock days per hectare. Then we factor in how big it is, and we record our total stock days available in each paddock. So we calculate out, so our stock days per hectare multiplied by the number of hectares gives us our total available in each of those paddocks, and then we total that up. So we're in here, we've totaled up and we've got 40,702 stock days available at the moment, feed in the paddock. We then look at how many days our non-growth is going to be. So here we've got 180 days with a 60-day drought reserve for you guys. In this one we're working on 153 days, so June through to October. And we've got a drought reserve of 61 days, November and December. So that gives us total days of 214 days that we have to make 40,000 odd stock days last. So that gives us our carrying capacity. So based on that number of days, with the stock that's in the paddock, the feed that's in the paddock, we can carry 190 standard animal units for that total period right through to the end of our drought reserve. So we know that. We've done the estimate, calculated out for each of the paddocks, worked out what this period of time is, calculated it out, and we can carry 190 based on the hay, the feed that's in the paddock. Not the hay. Now, if you are using hay to supplementally feed, you can include that on to your chart. So you'd include and you'd work out how many kilos in a particular paddock that you're feeding out at that period of time to the stock, and you can include that on your chart. If you're doing supplemental feeding, we record it here that we're supplementing, but it's just nutrition, minerals and things. It's not substitute feeding, which is what feeding hay or the equivalent would be. So the next thing is then to say, what are the stock days that we need for the stock we have on hand? So in the bottom part of that chart, we have this little component, and we go in there and say, well, we've got some bulls, we've got 4 bulls, they're 550 kilos, and from our Penderris chart, our DSC LSU chart, they're worth 2.6 standard animal units. So we're looking at LSUs here for this example, so rather than DSCs. So that gives us 8.24. So each of the 4 bulls is worth 2. So the total of those bulls is 8.24. And then in July, he's the same. So you fill in those months, so they're going to be the same. For our cows, we've got 120 cows, 460 kilos. They're 1.64, gives us 197 standard animal units. And we've got some weaners, 135 weaners at 180, and they're 0.79. So that's 107. But we're going to sell them at the end of June, in this case. So for June, we've got 312 standard animal units, and then after that, we've got 128. We could handle 190. So looks like we might be okay. See how we go. So we might be okay, but what happens? So we get to that point and we go, okay, we've got 190, we're running 220, what do we do? So this is an example. So if we said we had 8,000 stock days of feed for 200 days, and we're currently carrying 70 stock. So we got 8,000 standard days for 200 days, means we can carry 40 head. So that 190 on the other one, in this case it's 40. We've got 70. So if we don't destock, we get to 114 days and that's it. Feed's gone. Out the door. have to sell them or we have to start feeding hay and we're in, that's it.
That's why we're feeding hay.
Yeah, all right. So what else could we do?
Yeah.
So if we say, well, actually, there's a portion of those that are nearly ready to go, I'm going to hold the 70 for 50 days because I can feed those, and then I'm going to sell 30 of those. Or sell 40, sorry. We can carry the rest of those 30 through for the rest of those 150 days. But if we don't, if we say, oh no, I want to hang on to them a little bit longer, yeah, I'll just keep them on a bit longer, by that stage we're running out, our feed's getting down. So to be able to get us through the end of the 200 days, we actually have to sell 52 of them then. And then if we go, and the next step's only 15 days extra. We can only keep 10 to get us through the extra 100 days. So if we'd gone from 70 to 40 here, we could have gone with 40 head all the way through. By waiting 50 days, we can only handle 30. So each time we're getting less and less and less and less to be able to do the feed there without adding anything else into it. So the earlier we can make that decision to do the destock, the less we'll need to destock. Okay? So if we do it here, on the other chart we've got 190 is what we can carry, we've got 213, okay, let's destock there, which means we know we can carry the 190 all the way through. And these ones we're selling are most likely in pretty good condition because we're at the end of our growing season, they've had feed, they're in pretty good condition. Now if we hold them on, and we're trying to hold all these on down through here, nutritional value of that feed is decreasing as we go through that period of time. The chances are by the time we get out here to 100 days, they might not be in quite as good a condition and prices might have changed and everybody else is in the same position and you're starting to offload stock when other people are offloading stock as well. So this is where we've got the ability here to plan for a drought reserve, and we can actually match our stocking rate to our carrying capacity for this period of time. Planning for a non-growing period for me, I like it because it's like you've got this defined period, you've measured the amount of feed and you monitor that so you know how accurate you're going to be, but you can just go, right, here it is, this is my plan. You monitor and adjust it through, it's easy, it's pretty good to do. So the next step, once we've, yep.
What would often happen, say, is we'll invariably get a thunderstorm, one, probably two, at some point in that November through to, that often, it's around Christmas time or whatever, and it generally drops the quality of pasture really, really quickly.
Right, drops it down, yeah, okay.
So, so you can do this planning, and so we're going to get to this point, but then you get this thunderstorm that'll happen, and the quality will drop.
Mm-hmm.
And so I might have kept this paddock over here that grows in February.
Later on. But it's now dropped, yeah.
It's now dropped. So it dropped significantly.
Yeah, so what you would be doing is replanning when that happens. And you go through that process, you go out to the paddocks and you go, well, okay, I said this paddock that I had in reserve, had later in the chart was, 10 stock days. Now we've had a thunderstorm and I've actually only got 5 stock days per hectare. Okay, replan. What's that effect does that do to our number? So our 190 at the bottom of the thing will go, it'll drop to 160. And then you're at this point to say, well, what do I do? Do I put some hay out to do that? You test your decision. You say, well, I can put some hay out, you get creativity out, put hay, I could find some adjustment, I could sell them. You've got a number of options you start to look at in that plan, but that's at the point you replan. Now, what you could do if you're fairly confident that an event's going to happen, then plan it from the start. Have a look at it and say, okay, well, up to this point we've got this many stock days, and then after that, it's probably an 80% chance that we'll be at this level. So you can then plan that out and have a look at how that affects your how many stock you keep on and what you do with them. Yeah. So this is where you start to think about your enterprise mix within your operation to decide, okay, well, for me to be able to manage the improvement of those ecosystem processes and be able to, still generate profit, because if you start feeding, then, it's like us. Like, I could have started feeding our cattle in February. I didn't know when it was going to rain. No idea. Sometime in the future. So I'm banking on an unending cost within my business. So I went, okay, well, I've built flexibility in mind to say, well, I'm going to, at the moment, the way we're set up, I'm just trading out. So I'll trade out, sell out stock. I had breeding stock. I was going to keep the calves, and if it had been a good season, I might have even rejoined the cows. But I went, no, I'll do that because I didn't know what's going to happen. But I can make all those assessments and test those decisions and see what works for me. But the flexibility of your enterprise means that when things happen, you've got that option of saying, well, and you can set a destocking policy, which is the other part of it too. So if something happens, you create a policy and says, okay, if we have to destock, what sequence do we destock? So I'll cull ewes first to go. Okay, well, we'll cull early and we'll get those out. Or then you might go, okay, the next one might be some of the young stock. We'll keep these ones that are growing out, but we'll get rid of the really young stock. And you create your plan as to what that is, so that if you hit those events or a dry period or whatever else, you've already got that decision process already thought through, which means that when you go to do it, you're not sitting in a crisis point going, oh, bloody hell, we've had 3 weeks of rain and now the feed's completely gone, what am I going to do? You've actually sort of, oh, that's right, pull out the policy, okay, well, this is the sequence that we do things in. So,
but like, as you know, our business model, we can't do stuff, because we supply every month. So how does that work?
Yeah, it's a challenge. And you're doing it now. You've got stock out and adjustment, and that's the part of it.
Is it because we might have more land than we would normally stock, so we don't definitely overstock?
Yeah. And setting, and we're looking at the same sort of thing for our businesses to say, well, what's the base level that we want to be able to do it? So our carrying capacity for our block might be 60 to 100 livestock units. Yeah. We're looking at a business model that means that we could make the profit that we want, the income we want, at 40. So we're always below that. Now that means when we've got the good season, we'll be trading right up to the 100 as we need to. But we're structuring it so that we can say, okay, we want consistency the same as you. We want a consistency to supply lamb and stuff to things. And then we're also looking at, well, what's our other strategy? What other land have we got close by that we might be able to get access to at a low cost? And for us, there's some rural lands, stock reserves and things that are coming up for lease and stuff that we're looking at options to take on to do that. Yeah, it's a challenge. The other thing is for you in your business, and we'll do this too, is communicating with the customers.
Well, yeah. So the other problem is too, being a rare breed. There's not much genetic.
Yeah, that's.
So we kind of hold on to it.
If you want to add complexity to your business, then 2 rare breeds and. Yeah, and direct custom supply.
We're still looking good.
Yeah, it's a challenge. Yeah, but the other thing too is if you're doing your planning, you're less likely to get yourself caught in a position where you're having to destock by major numbers. You might say, oh, we're going to reduce our turnover from the one, because you're holding yours for 2.5 years. Yeah. You might go, actually, we're going to get rid of some of these, so we're back down, and we might have a lower supply for a period of time, and so you've got limited stock for your customers, like limited meat for your customers for a period of time. So yeah. All right. So step 8, we start. Oh, sorry. Go back a bit. We're recording the number of herds and the paddocks we have allocated to them. So if this is our paddock setup, we've got 3,200 hectares, we've got 32 paddocks, 100 hectares each. beautiful, perfectly divided up, you know, everything's even, everything's square, right? So in this we've got four herds of cows, and each of those has got 8 paddocks in their rotation. Okay, so we're rotating, but we've got 4 lots of it, and we're working around. Our density is 1 cow per hectare in each of those, and what that means for a 160-day grazing period, our average graze is 20 days, and our recovery between grazes will be 140 days. So we've grazed for 20 days, and then it's 140 days until we get back to that point. Okay? Now, if we took the same place, same stock, and we join those 4 herds together into one. So we've still got 32 paddocks. It's 1 herd of 400 cows, but now we've got 32 paddocks to run them through. Our density has increased, it's gone from 1 per hectare to 4, so density's gone up, but we've still got the same stocking rate, hasn't changed. Now, our average graze period is 5 days. So we're talking before about overgrazing plants. So staying too long. So if we're in a growing season and you're in a paddock for 20 days, what's the chance of your grass starting to regrow? It's pretty high. So there's a good chance of starting to overgraze that plant. At 5 days, we've reduced that right down. Might get a little bit, but not a major amount. And when we were at 20 days, we had our recovery period was shorter. Now we've got 155 days of recovery for each paddock. So by taking the same stock and putting them into one paddock, we're actually reducing our chance of overgrazing from a second bite, and we're reducing our chance of overgrazing from coming back too soon because we've extended our recovery period. So multi-joinings, all those sort of things, yeah, add complexity to that, but this is to start you thinking about what could we do? Is there some things we can do differently because of the advantages this gives you to your grazing management and your ability to improve your land gives you some really good benefits. So, but again, that's a decision for you to go through and say, okay, no, we want to do it this way, we've tested it, that's our context. And each of you are going to have a different situation with your enterprise mix. So once we know how many herds and paddocks we've got per herd, we can then work out what the length of the average graze period is and the number of selections we have. So choosing a number of our selections. With 10 paddocks, 200 days, we're 20 days in each paddock. One selection. We go around once, 10 days each paddock, one selection. What that would look like from a nutrition. So at the moment, where this is our highest level of nutrition, this is the lowest, and at this level here, that's our maintenance level of nutrition within the paddock. So the grass, once it goes below that, we're starting to have to supplement to be able to keep animals at maintenance. So if we had once they go into the paddock, they'll graze it. We start the graze at all the plants are going to be high in nutrition, and as they stay in for a few days, the nutrition is going to slowly drop off in that paddock as they get down into different things in the paddock. So that's the pattern of nutrition for animals if we're in there. So I'll go from high, they'll drop down, high, drop down, high, drop down. So your rumen's going to be changing as you go through, as you go from high nutrition down, and it changes over time, and then we get them into a new paddock. It's going to take them a few days to readjust the rumen and go down again. So if we did 2 selections, what that means is for this total period here, we're going to go through all the paddocks here, and then we're going to go through all the paddocks again for a second selection of that. What that looks like is when we go through the first time, we're staying up in that high nutrition. We're moving on a more regular basis. We're moving, it might be 5 days, we've dropped it to 3 days, for example. So we're moving them in and out. So the rumen is still getting all high nutritional food. It stays at a higher even plane of nutrition for a longer period of time. So instead of going high, low, we're staying fairly high. Then we come back the second time, okay, all the paddocks have been grazed, so we're going back in at a slightly lower. But the animal's able to adjust to that lower nutrition pain, and we know that we're at a point where we probably have to put supplementation out. So we, in the winter, we use, for ease of management, use blocks with urea in them, and we'll start at the start of the season at 5% and we'll work up to 10-15% urea, so that we've got dry feed in the paddock and we're supplementing with, and those blocks also have a bit of bypass protein in them as well, and we're feeding the bugs in the rumen to help with that supplementation. So in this case, we don't have to supplement in the first half, but we only have to supplement in the second half. Now, if we go to many paddocks and we're moving them on so we double the number of paddocks in it, we move them more often, so the time period they go from high to low is really quick. So across the whole thing, it actually becomes fairly even in nutrition across the whole lot. You won't need supplementation because every second day you're going into a new paddock with the high nutritional food, and that's another advantage of going to that high number of paddocks. But you can choose for what you want number of selections. Pretty sure we did 2. What I've done here, you'll see there's a little line, and I had a look to see what our average graze period would be if I did 1 and what it would be if I did 2. So for us, through winter, it's not necessarily a no growth if we get rain. It's just a really slow growth. So I went, okay, well, if I went 1 selection, my average graze period is going to be 11 days for my paddocks. But if I do 2, it's only 5.6 days, which means if we do get some rain through here, and you can see we got some in June, a little bit in July, then we had a bit of dry period through until September. But if we do get some rain and some growth, my graze period is lower, so there's a lower chance of me overgrazing stuff that might be growing out in the paddock. Okay. For you guys here, if your non-growing is non-growing, then it's like this example you're doing here is a North Queensland or a Queensland property. So when they get in the dry season, that's it. It's dry season. Nothing's going to grow. So we're putting in here in let's say line 27 what our number of selections is. We calculate our average paddock quality. So here we had our number of stock days in each paddock, and what we want to do is find out what the average of all these is, and that's 4,070, which is be 1/10 of this. Then we use that figure to work out our average graze period. So the average graze period is our number of non-growing days multiplied by the number of, divided by the number of paddocks. So we had 214 divided by 10, so 21.4, divided by the number of selections, divided by, in this case, 1. Okay? So we put that down there. So it's 15. So if we said 2 selections, then that'd be 7. Or 7.5. So we're going from an average graze period of 15 if we do 1 to 7.5 if we do 2 in this case. Then we do the drought reserve period. So we go 61 days divided by the 10, in this case 9 paddocks, because in this case, remember in the drought reserve, we had 1 paddock that ran out of water. So there's no way that we can work out a plan that we can use it during that period. It's out of the equation. So we've reduced our area. So we're going back down to 9. We're still doing 1 graze. So we're going, our graze period is 6.8. Sorry, let's go back here. So then, and we're following along, we're step 13, calculate our actual graze periods for each of our paddocks. Because each of our paddocks has a different rating and a different size. So we have to take that into account. So what we do is we say our paddock rating divided by the average paddock rating. So in this one we've got 992 divided by 4070 multiplied by your average graze period will give you your actual graze period for the non-growing. So in this case, that paddock is 3.7. Okay, so average across the whole of the paddocks, our graze period is 15.2. This one's only got 992 stock days compared to the average, so it's less days in that paddock. So we fill in all of those, so we do that calculation down there. So that gives us our non-growing graze period for every paddock. So we know how long we're going to be in each paddock. Then we take out the paddock that we can't graze, and we come up with a new average across the remaining paddocks, and we do the same thing for our drought. So we take our stock days, divide it by our new average across all the paddocks, multiplied by our average growth period, gives us our drought. So in the growing period, we're doing 3.7 in this paddock, and in the non-growing, we're doing two days. So that gets us through to the end of there. So now everything's on the chart. We're ready to plan where they go. Creativity takes over, and we work out the best way of getting ourselves around our property so that we take into account all those management things that we put on there. So we had calving and what paddocks we wanted to be in calving, and we want to be able to, you know, be up in these paddocks early in the season so that we get with fire risk and all those things on there. So what we do is we plan backwards. So for our non-growing, we start here in October, and we're in our calving area, so we start to plan our paddocks, and we'll just go through, and this comes up to you. You just work it out. So what you want to do, so most people when we do it in class, you'll get and we try and get pretty creative with our little maps, and we usually map it out, and they'll try and go, right, we'll go around like this, and we make it virtually impossible to go around like that. Because all of our, like here, you know, you're saying you got roads and railway lines and, you know, all sorts of things that you've got to take into account, so going around. But you also don't want to do a pattern so you're in the same paddock at the same time every year, because you'll have the same impact on it exactly the time every year. So there could be a grass in that paddock, in that environment, that's its time, and if you do the same thing to it every year, what's going to happen? It's going to disappear. You're going to do it all the time. So, you know, add a bit of chaos into this every now and again and go, right, we've got to toss it up, you know, change it round, make sure we don't do patterns. That's why this is not a system. You can't systematise this. It's not, you know, X number of patterns. You know, we don't move stock every day. You know, if you're watching YouTube videos from the States, they'll say, right, we move stock every day. If you've got constant growth all through the year, you know how much it's going to grow all through the year, and you've got the same feed in every paddock and all stuff, you can move every day. But we don't. You know, if you've got the same personnel all year, and you don't have kids, and you don't have, you know, bank managers telling you got to go and do your annual review and all that sort of stuff, you can do it every day. It just happen. But no, we've got our complexity, and that's where we've mapped in all of that complexity in here, and we're starting to do that plan. Now, as I said, you're only doing this twice a year. 2 times a year, you sit down, take you a couple of hours. You start off with all the people in the business, and you sit down and go, okay, what are all these things? You brainstorm up all that sort of stuff, and you start working. And then when you replan for next year, you pull this out and you go, actually, calving didn't quite work then. What if we adjust our calving? We might adjust it, or we'll reduce, we'll take the bulls out a week earlier, because that gives us a little bit more flexibility at this point. And you can start to then look at how you adjust your management to help better manage what you've got out in the paddocks. So in this case, we started our planning, and we plan all the way back so that, as we said, we wanted to be in these paddocks fairly early. So we can't be in this paddock because of the stubble quail, so we can only graze that paddock in October. So that's a good place to start. We can't be in this paddock here because of, what was it here? We had the wheat that's going to be in there. We had to be in these paddocks within that grade out period because of our one of our management factors. I can't remember which one it was now. And our no fences in this one gives us an indication that we need to do the fences before we get there. Okay, so in my chart, this highlighted yellow line for this, which is mine which is across the river, says I've got to check the boundary and do the floodgates before I go in that paddock, because I've got a 2-wire electric floodgate with my neighbour that every time we get a storm it disappears. So I do it. Now next time I go through this in the summer, I won't be grazing that paddock across the river, because when the storm comes through, my cattle are on the other side of the river and my electric fences disappear down the creek. So I'll put that into my plan to say, well, I can't do that paddock after the end of November. So if I'm going to graze across the river, I want it early. It's also got a bit of bracken in it, so I can't do it in the winter when the bracken's growing, so I've got a time period I can put that in there. So you can, we can count for all that complexity of our management in the plan. So any questions? I'll pull up there just for a moment and grab myself a drink of water. Have a think for a sec. Is anybody, something doesn't make sense? Sorry? There is a spreadsheet version of this, yes. Yeah. So my dad now, he doesn't do this bit. He has all of this and the rainfall in a spreadsheet that he's set up, so he can see what his graze periods and things is, and he does his assessment of his pastures and stuff, knows what his average graze period is, pretty much knows where he's going to take stuff on through the year, and then he'll, because some of the stock he's working with, it's actually with some adjustment guys, and they chuck enough chaos into the system anyway. They come out and go, oh, I'm going to drench today. And he goes, fine, you go mushroom. So I'm not doing it. So, but yeah, there's a spreadsheet. There's the late Bruce Ward has actually done a full spreadsheet with all of this bit in it as well. And if you're so inclined, Maya Grazing has a subscription-based online version that you can use. It's about $60 a month to do it. It's good in that it gives you long-term data that's easily accessed. It gives you the ability to do what-if scenarios, especially in a growing season. What if it doesn't rain by this date and I keep the stocking rate? What's going to happen? Where do I go? Do I drop too fast? You can do that sort of analysis. One of the disadvantages of it, the great thing about this, you can stick it on the fridge. Ours is in the kitchen above the calendar. My wife can see it, I can see it, we know when things are on, when stuff comes up on the calendar that we haven't taken account for, we can then look at this and go, oh, actually, my daughter, I'm quite proud of her, she got her Gold Duke of Ed award, finished it off last year, so we had to go to Sydney for 3 days. Well, you can go on the chart and go, well, that wasn't planned. Okay, yeah, well, the cattle are going to be in that paddock. Actually, what I'll do, I'll swap, I'll put them in this one, they're going to be in there for 4 days, then I don't have to move them. You can adjust it. Everybody can see it, and everybody then is involved with it. If it's on your computer, it tends to be one person that sees it, and there's one person that updates it and changes it, and that knowledge and the thinking is just one person. So it has its advantages, and you get some easy data and things. I would suggest if you're going to use a spreadsheet, still you could do it together. Use the spreadsheet, calculate out, draw it out, and then you've got your data there. It wouldn't take much extra. If you're doing Maya Grazing, I'm pretty sure you can print them out. I would suggest printing them so you can then write on them and do it. And once you're actually in the process of doing it, so we've planned this, and you can see here, this is my actual, and this is my plan. I switched on to the next one. I come in and I go, oh, a couple of days, that's right, yep, we're still in that paddock, and now we'll move to that one. And I just fill in the line. When I move them out of a paddock, you'll see next to here, I've got an L, M or H. So whether it was a light, medium or heavy graze, just a bit of an assessment on whether I think it was heavy or stuff. And I've got Next to it in pencil is the number of stock days I was planning to take out of it, and on this side is the number of stock days I actually took out of it. So what we then get into the next stage, once we've done our plan, we check it, go double check, make sure everything all works and we're happy with it. Then we stick it in operation. So then it becomes monitoring of how we're performing. So we want to monitor our animal performance, and we can do that through dung scores and gut fill for cattle. I haven't found the equivalent for sheep. How do you think what's the equivalent for gut fill for sheep? How do we know they're getting enough?
Sitting down.
Sorry?
They're sitting down in the paddock.
Sitting down, ruminating, yep, that's a good one.
I reckon you can do it as long as you know, after shooting or something like that.
Yeah, but most of the time you can't. If they're standing there going, bah, bah, they're used to moving, and you'll see. Are they unsettled? Are they sitting down ruminating, as you said? Are they happy? Are they content? You know, you get a pretty good idea of whether you've got enough. You have a look at it. Dung chip.
Just on that two things, it appears to me that it's more complex with sheep, this system.
This system? Why would you say that?
I'm just thinking, if you're going to high swimming rates and the aspect of mismothering, I suppose you're looking at, you're probably saying you would set stock for, say, a 5-week period before that.
There's ways of doing your moves. So on mine, I've got them in 2 paddocks for the whole period of time. Because we hadn't been in the lease country for a long time, I hadn't set them up properly. What I was going to do after going through that, the next time, was actually divide that paddock within itself so that I was actually moving. And if I had a single wire that the ewes wouldn't go through, but the lambs can just go paddock to paddock. There are plenty of people now, and Charlie Arnott is running a sheep and cattle flurd, both calving and lambing at the same time at the moment, and moving it through his rotation. It means you've got to be slower, take your time, there's things you have to change. It is possible, but again, it comes up to how you feel it's going to work for you in your management situation. For me, I was going to trial, setting it up so I was still moving them within those paddocks. For me, that then gave me a bit more density, because what I actually saw because I was supplementary feeding, and I got good impact. Once you got a bit of rain, I was getting some of our perennial grasses really responding. So I went, oh, okay, and I took that over and I said, see this? Here's a strip, look at that. That was one feeding in one spot, and there was this run of green grass there. So I went, right, I want to get that impact, and I was going to look at doing that so that lambs could come and go, and we move the ewes. And in other cases, it might be that if you're set up, you can open the gate and let them move themselves, and they may move over a couple of days. So you can do that as well. That's the other one. And the other one is the same sort of thing as you open up this gate, then open up the next gate next couple of days, and then once the later ones, which would have been the ones that lambed a couple of days ago, they've settled, then you move them through and you close that gate off. So you might extend over 2 or 3 paddocks and sort of, it'd be like a phased move through them.
As far as I just think that cattle replacement has one calf, and we're aiming to have multiple birds in the street.
And I lost one and mismothered one because bloody stupid cows, I moved them and I went, yeah, they're all happy. And they planted them in the tussock and I didn't find them, unfortunately. Found one 24 hours later and then took him into the paddock and he didn't mother up. And the other one I didn't find until 2 months later. I walked across him, but yeah, it can happen in all of it. So, yeah, I wouldn't say it's more difficult, it's just different. There are ways to do it, and I think once you get into doing them, they become easier. So dung score in the back of your booklets here. These are the ones Graham Hand developed with NRM. You've got your cattle dung and your sheep dung. I'm still not quite convinced with the sheep dung. I think sheep tend to be, he wants it in a 3. I think they tend to be in pretty much a 4 or 5 a fair bit of the time. And I don't know that actually is deterioration of their performance. I was using this last year and that's what I was noticing. The only type of it sitting in the shed that I could buy if I wanted to. So
good to interview.
Yeah. But I found the metal tread-ins with the 3 things on it quite good. And then Speed Rate, I've got a clip-on, plastic, you just clip it on and you can add extra wires if you want to it. And I picked up 200 of those for $50 or something.
Are you using single wires?
Cheap, 2 wires. Initially 3 and then dropped them back to 2. What they're sort of talking about with sheep, especially crossbred sheep, merinos, on the mum and dad's our lease place, we've got most of it's permanent fencing. It's 2-wire electric with probably 20 metre post spacings, and the wires go like this. And for merinos, not a problem. Keeps me in. The lambs, the crossbred, the first cross lambs we had, they were like all over that. But for us, it didn't matter. They kept coming back through to the mothers. No, I'm not in daughters. But that's what I've been talking to guys online about. Exactly, the Dorpers and Suffolks and all these other things and Australian Whites which you're looking at. And they said once you train them, the same with cattle. And I said, oh, okay, how do you train them? And it's, good voltage, tight, close post spacings in your training areas. And if anything gets through, sell it.
We can't do that with pigs.
No, you can't do it with pigs, but with sheep and we found this, we had out of 100 lambs that we weaned onto the other place, we initially had 4 that kept going under some of our plain wire permanent fences. And they'd just go to the next paddock and I wasn't too worried about it. And then after about a month, it was 6. And then by the time I sold them, it was probably about 10. They kept covers following them through.
I've got some orange netting, electric fencing, and one sheep, she would get out of any normal fence, and she has learned not to go near the orange thing. Even when I turn it off, she won't go near it.
Yeah. Once they train on it, they're
then just one on nutrient cycling, wool has a high sulphur component.
Yep.
So there's a lot of wool exported off properties all the time with the movement of nutrients out, including carbon and other things. So what does Christine Jones say with her research about sulphur and depletion of the sulphur resource over a 100-year period?
She's still saying there's enough there, but if you're concerned about it, sulphur's still pretty cheap to supplement. So yeah, supplement. But she's saying there's no elements that she's looking at that. Yeah, she said she gave one test to a guy who said, oh no, you're exporting it off, the same thing. And I've seen there's some YouTube ones that try and do this balancing act. Yeah. And she said, here it is. Here's the total in this soil. I don't know whether it was sulphur, but it was stuff. She said, how much is available? And he calculated, said, about 10,000 years worth. So yes, we're still mining a resource if we're not bringing it back in. But if you think about from a planet point of view, it's a finite resource regardless of where we are. So if we bring it in, we're mining it from somewhere else and bringing it in. So if we can utilise what's here, it's going to be cheaper for us.
I heard that one about that, which I think refers to phosphorus, but I don't know about I haven't heard anything about the sulphur.
Yeah. If anyone's on Facebook, there's a Regenerative Ag Facebook group, which one of the girls up our way, Sarah Smoother, kicked off after a field day. It's got about 7,000 people on it now. It'd be a great question to pose on there.
Regen Ag Alliance?
No, it's just called the Regenerative Agriculture Group. We've got one for our area. That one started as a local region and went big really, really quickly, and all the local guys, so we're going, we just want to ask local questions. So we've started another one, which is the Southern New England Regenerative Ag Group. But that big one, ask that because there'd be plenty of people on there.
Potassium is mobile in the soil because it's chemical nature.
Yep.
And where we have the duplex soils, we can get really high rainfall events in winter and so on. And so there's a lot of leaching down to the duplex load and medium the surface of that clay through the load. So I can understand the one about the phosphorus and the seed, because it's well established about the unavailable seed. You
can pass that around.
Very phosphate forming and that super typically broken by the exodates of roots and so on. But the potash with the mobility of it anyway, because it's already highly soluble, moving through the system under high rainfall conditions. I can wonder about the nutrient balance in this sort of system over 20 or 30 period and how that actually works out.
Yeah, I don't know. From my understanding is if we can get that biology and the humic carbon and all those things going, then a lot of that it won't leach as fast, because you've got that cation exchange that can hold some of that stuff in that structure. But I think the other thing with it too is that there's sort of two schools within regenerative ag from a mineral point of view, from our agronomy. There are some good friends of mine who are adamant that instead of focusing on the biology, we've got to focus on balancing soils before we get to the biology. And then if you talk to Christine and Nicole Masters and these guys, they're saying, well, if we get the biology going, because we can manage it pretty easily within the system, the other stuff will balance itself out. We're still learning, we're still researching, we're still finding out what works in biological systems. Yeah. So I don't have the answers. Brian comes with his pockets hanging out of his pockets, so no silver bullets. I'm not, I know my environment. I've been involved with a few different environments over the years. years, but you know, we're still learning. I'm learning all the time. You know, that's I said the other day. I was talking about clover and where it sits. I'm going, that's completely not what I thought. So it was a high succession plant. It's actually not. It's low succession. So
you've had to stock in a paddock, and they've still selectively grazed it. So there's some stuff that's eaten right now, and some stuff that's not.
Yep.
It's a perception of things like topping it with a slash or a mulch or those sorts of things.
So what's my...
Top the paddock off with a slash or a mulch or mechanical like that to kind of level the playing field? Or is that just a human trying to be neat?
It's a human trying to be neat. That's me. For us in our environment, it's good protection because it's usually at the time of year when our low growth through winter. So that standing stuff holds air, stops air flowing across the surface, holds the temperature at the ground level a few degrees higher. So the impact of frost for us. So I leave it. I'd never touch it. But it's also available next time they come back for your animals to impact it and tromp it on the ground. And if you cut it, generally, you'll cut it off and it'll sit up there. It won't get to the soil surface. So if you remember that mineral, the mineral cycling, we need to get it to the soil surface for it to mineralise. If we cut it and it sits there, what's going to happen to the minerals? They're going to oxidise off. So it can't biologically break down unless we've got moisture to biologically break it down. So we need to get it at the soil surface. So if you're using a solar powered tractor, a cow, a pig or a sheep or whatever, they get it to the ground and that mineral cycle improves. So friends were just on a place, the guy who owns it, they were working on it, and he's a polo cross or polo player. So he wants all the paddocks to look like polo fields. It's everything, cleaned everything up, all the sticks, everything all gone. And if you're taking all that off, like our tall grass the other day, I said we walked out and we saw the spider webs. Well, that tall grass, that's what the spider webs are on. So if you're doing that, then you might be impacting something else. So, my opinion, but that's just me. Yeah. All right, so we're looking at, as I said, we've got our dung score, gut fill. So have people doing gut fill scores and looked at it? Sort of not? Yeah, so you're looking at trying to think of which side of the cow it is, the left-hand side I think it is. Usually you stand at the gate. As they go through, you're sort of getting an idea when you're moving them to say, are they full or are they not full? And I think there's you want about 50 to 60% of them to have a good fill or more. If they're all full and they're standing around chewing, then maybe you've stayed there too long, they've filled up and they've eaten more than they should have, or if they aren't full, might not have been enough there. So have a look at it so you can assess it, and then you've got to go in and have a look at the paddock and say, okay, they're all full, what's happened here? Oh, okay, I need to adjust. My grace period might be too long or it might be too short, and you can adjust your plan. So that's the thing, once we've done our monitoring, we've done our feed squares and we start implementing this plan, that's when we go out and we put the cattle in the first paddock or the sheep in the first paddock, and we go, right, we're going to be here for 3 days. We come back after 2 and we go, oh, it's all gone. And we've realised that we've got to have them calculated correctly. When we've got a monitoring, straight away. We're not waiting part through the plan. So then what would we do? We could go, okay, well I need to change our paddocks, I need to destock some animals, I need to make some changes. So you can then go back and replan. So that monitoring starts straight away. And that's where that little monitoring card that's going around gives the ability to go, yep, is that all right? Where are we up to?
Would you say that it's better to leave them in that paddock than just move them on and change it on the whole rotation?
Well, in the non-growing, nothing's growing, so it doesn't matter. In the non-growing, if you come back and there's not enough in there when you calculated there should have been, you got too many animals. That's what it comes down to. Or if you come back and you calculated it and you thought, oh gee, I thought there'd be more in there, you can go, okay, well, maybe I'll extend my grazing period then by a day or so, which means that you end up, your drought reserve would actually extend out because you're staying longer in your paddocks. So you might have underestimated your feed and you end up with more as you go around. And if you say, okay, well, I could leave them there longer, maybe I could split the next paddock in half and put them in for the same graze period. And then you're increasing your density per hectare, which means you're starting to get minimal impact, and some of that standing feed might get trampled onto the ground and you get a nice litter cover so that when the rain comes, it's hitting onto litter and stuff, so you can adjust it that way. So, you know, but it comes down to that monitoring of it. If you're running out of feed, okay, do your daily animal checks, combine 2 herds. So if you're running like the 4 we said before, combine them together, allows you to manage that. Increase the number of paddocks, as I just said, through temporary fencing, split them in half and change that. And destock sooner. So we saw the impacts of destocking and how long, you know, the sooner we do that, then the more stock we can hold for the time we have remaining. Long term, plan for more frequent droughts, improve the effectiveness of the water cycle as we're trying to do till rain comes. And that's just an example of a chart from the HM Current Holistic Management book to show you one that's all filled out. You've got your graze periods and things in there and your management factors all factored in. So that's non-growing season. Now in the growing season, everything's changing all the time. Growth rates change, rain comes, goes, heat comes and goes, late frosts, all those things. So, on the second page of your handout, there is an aid memoir for a growing season. It's similar, process is fairly similar, with some variations. We're not going to go through it step by step like we just did because the process is fairly similar. There's some variations in it, but what you would do in a growing season is you might not sit down and plan the whole season. If you've got some key management things that you have through the season, you could plan to them or up to, you know, from them. But it's probably going to be that by the time you've put that plan in place and you get 2 weeks in, your growth rates change and things change and you're having to move things around anyway. So usually from a sort of a 6-month growing season plan, you might plan 2 or 3 months and then just keep, you know, moving, adjusting that as you go through. And then you're from a time factor, you can still put in all of your management factors into the plan, but your actual paddock moves, you might only plan a couple of months in advance, and then it takes you about half an hour to sit down and go, okay, well that's worked okay, we'll go here and I'll make sure we do that there, and I want to put the impact on that paddock as we go through. So in the growing season, our focus is on overgrazing plants. So our plants are growing, we want to make sure that we're not staying in our paddocks too long and we're not coming back too early. Now, the effect of overgrazing, so from the Myer grazing program I talked about earlier, they've got some really good data now. This is one particular grazier did an assessment. So he calculated that the risk that he was getting foregone income of $127 per hectare by overgrazing, and it was taking those paddocks 33 months before they got back to where they were before he overgrazed them. So that's $127 per hectare per year in forage value he lost. If they had started reducing stock rate early at the start of the drought, now it took 33 months extra to recover, so I calculated out that's $350 per hectare it cost him by not destocking. Now, GD Earl's got some similar figures as far as destocking. So this is a comparison of paddock love grass in an experiment where they cut all the grass at one time to start with. This first one here was then cut every 2 weeks. This one was cut every 4 weeks. This one was every 8 weeks, and this was uncut for the whole of the period of time. And you can see the 2 week and 4 week, especially the 2 week, all that root mass is gone. So they're coming back every 2 weeks, they're coming back regardless of what it was. Plant's using root energy, keeps putting root energy back up, and it says I keep running out of root energy and eventually the roots die. productivity, and you can see the root mass probably between these two over the period of time this was 12 months. There's very little difference between the 8-week cut. So every 8 weeks it's giving time for that plant to regrow. I graze it again, it regrows, the grazing again. So that's 12 months worth of impact. That there, it's getting hard with this sunlight here. But you've got a severely overgrazed plant here. It's starting to get a prostrate pattern of growth. It's trying to go on, trying to keep out of that mouth. And your root mass is depleted, is disappearing. And if you start to see your perennials pulled out of the ground, that's a pretty good indicator that the root mass has disappeared. On the other hand, severe grazing is, we can't stop it. We can't, especially cattle, sheep, even sheep to an extent, but they'll always go into the paddock and graze the best stuff, and they'll graze it to the ground. They'll love it. So severe grazing depends on what recovery we get it. So if we graze our plant and then we let it start to regrow, and we said our recovery is when that bulk of that plant has regrown to what it was when we started. So that's recovery. So that's when we use the cages, and you'll see some pictures here in the middle. So that's our recovery period. So here's some pictures of brines. So this is, pretty sure this is up in the Arcadia Valley, up in Queensland. So this is Fred. Now this is a good thing. So go into your paddock, and we're talking about focusing on your good species. Go to your paddock and find a perennial plant that you want. Name it. So that every time you go in your paddock, you go and find him and go, okay, Fred, how are you going? Take a picture of him, monitor him, because that gives you a really good indicator. That's the one you want, and if that's been impacted, you might need to think about changing some stuff. So this is Brian's Fred, and he's been following him for quite some time. So okay, so up here we got 8th of November, he was grazed. 9th of November, one day after, a little change. 2 days after, it's starting to shoot. 3 days, it's nearly regrown back before defoliation. 4 days after grade, defoliation is now larger than it was before. That'd be lovely, wouldn't it? So, if we have faster growth, we'll graze our plant, and our recovery period is only 30 days. So again, our plant's recovered back to this. So we don't want to graze it here because it's still using root energy. Here, it's starting to get a leaf and replenishing its root energy. Here, it's fully replenished its root energy and it's grown leaf back to what it was before. Cattle graze it again, and we can get a second graze again. The cycle starts again. And we did the growth curve of that up before, so you saw that, and this other one here with our root energy dropping down and allowing that root energy to be replenished before we graze again. Otherwise, we're on an ever declining phase with our perennials.
We found 30 days it would be exactly 30 days to regraze.
Yeah, it will change though. Yeah. So exclusion cages is a good way to monitor it. So there's an IBC cage. It's really hard to see that.
There's an IBC.
Wondering if we might move it. Might move it over there. So we've got a paddock here. This is Brian's place at Kindee down the coast. So the cattle gone in. Cages in the middle there. See if there's my cage is sitting in the middle. So that's after our graze. We're starting to regrow. The pasture outside's regrowing. What's inside the cage is also growing still. So we want to keep letting it grow until what's outside comes to the same bulk level as what's inside. So not height, but general leaf area. So when we're doing our pasture checks with this, we put it in the grass and we actually press down the grass till it resists. That's the bulk level. So we want that regrown up to what it was before we grazed it. So it comes through. So it's recovered. So the thickness of the grass and looking into the sward out here is what that looked like before. Now in this case, that grass has continued to grow. So if we actually, if we're able to, if you can let yours recover so that it goes beyond where it was, then you can get into a point where you're getting more and more feed. So that then when you get to the end of your growing season and you go to plan for your non-growing, you end up with more bulk to take you through the growing season, and so you'll be able to carry more stock days through. Slow growth, slow moves, and fast growth, fast moves. So it's based on the recovery of the plant. So we want to make sure that we give time for the plants to recover. I keep running away from Darren's camera. Fast moves, so if it's growing fast, so before here we had, on the hair we had the 60-day. We're doing slow moves, we got to 30, we start moving faster, we let that go. If in doubt, then we slow down, so that if we're going to do some impact from overgrazing, then we're having that impact on less of the land. And we're allowing the rest of it to recover before we get back onto it. So your recovery period is dictated by your graze period. So we've got a 30-day recovery period, which means we've got 10 days in each of those paddocks. So if we've got 4 paddocks, we're grazing in this one, so we take it off, and then we're doing 10 days in each of these, and it's 30 days before we get back into that. So if you want to have a look at the original theory behind this, there's Andre Boison wrote a book about this rotational grazing, which is where Alan Savory originally looked at the concepts of this. He's a French guy, and if you go through the book, it goes through all of these calculations of where he came up with this. The only thing he didn't add into it was managing complexity and changing the situation, because in the areas in Europe where he's doing it, they're in a very non-brittle environment and had less of that ability to affect, have impact on the ecology if they didn't do things.
The dairy farms that we're doing it for years, particularly in New Zealand, you know, they've done a lot of research and they just had a whole lot of differences. They like to keep between 2 inches and 6 inches to maximise the growth of their plant and recovery rates and all sort of stuff. Yeah. It's been happening for a long time over there.
Yeah, and plant ryegrass and have them flowing through them. So our graze period is 10. So our graze period equals our recovery period divided by the number of paddocks less 1, because there's 1 that we're in at the time. So if we had a 90-day recovery, our graze period would be 90 days divided by 3. So it'd be 30-day graze period in each paddock. Whether your recovery period is long enough, if you can actually get a cage that's rectangular, so you put it in there that way one time, then the next time you move it like that, which means that this area, by the time you come through the second time, has 2 times the recovery of what that area has. So you can see what would happen to your grass if you gave it twice as long recovery. And then if you wanted to, you could either go there and do 4 times, or the next time you move it there, and you're always getting that measure of that recovery and a bit of a test of what would happen if I extended it. And if you went back here, you go, well, what would happen if I extended it 4 times? Oh, what would it look like? Graham Hand talks about those safe to fail areas where you might put stock into it and let it recover for a whole 12 months and see what that looked like. So you can do some testing and some monitoring, and it's a bit like your cover crop stuff, you can assess that. So cover cropping reminded me, so we had cropping in our grazing plan from a wheat point of view, but you would then put in to your grazing plan, these are the paddocks I'm going to pasture crop this year, so that when you went into them, you can then, when you come out of them, you might then plant straight after your stock have gone through. So you can put that onto your chart as well. I forgot to mention that. Is there any questions about growing season? So the aide memoir, if you follow it through, it takes you through step by step by step. So it's, you can follow it through. And I'm happy to be available if anybody's got any questions or has a problem. Call Helen as well. She's got hers underway. So, you know, practice it and get it going. It's all, you know, don't be afraid to you know, we want to monitor it and make sure that we know where we're going, and if we fail, okay, we'll adjust it next time. So.